and exhibitions. She has presented and delivered various papers and lectures at both national and international platforms. Professor Bendur has also conducted different outreach, teaching, and training workshops, and she holds other career and academic highlights, such as honorary consultant and resource person at globeethics.net, editor, member of journals, and the list goes on. We are extremely delighted to have you amidst us, ma'am. I now request you to begin with your session. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a little difficult in the post-lunch session. So hopefully I will be giving you a very, a very interactive sort of talk. I am so honored that I have been invited here on behalf from the DU FDB program organized by Dr. Zairunisha and her team of wonderful people here, and it's a pleasure to be talking to my own colleagues, because it's not often that you get to talk to your peer group. As Zairunisha ji was saying today, we keep talking to bache. We're talking to our bache, our students, all the time, and most of the time we are dumbing down the concepts for them. We are not able to talk at an equal. So even in conferences, sometimes we present the conference. We are so busy discussing our own paper that we don't have time to interact. And so FTPs are a very interesting way in which we get our own sort of peers to come and talk to each other and perhaps share some kind of interesting ideas with each other. So I'm also grateful to my professors, Dr. Sundar Sarukai, and you have heard another of my mentors, Dr. Raghuram Raju, also speak. They've all been my teachers. Dr. Bala has also been looking after my work a little, and I'm very lucky to have these people who are guiding me. And because of them, I have managed to do quite a bit of research in the areas where, you know, research has not been done before. So in some sense, I realized after so many years of working, 2011, I think I finished my PhD. After so many years of working, I have realized that the way they have guided me in their PhD and the research, I'm now able to actually look at methodology in a whole different way. Because one of the important things that I bring to the table is interdisciplinarity. Because I studied as an undergraduate in science, so I'm very familiar, and environmental science. So I have done color spectroscopy and stuff like that. I did my zoology, so I've done my dissections and my zoological sample survey and field studies. I did environmental science, which means you go to the field and you test all the field, as the soil, air, water pollution, air pollution, all that you test. And then I did my master's in psychology, which is a whole different way of gathering data, right? You take questionnaires and you gather all those data. And then in my PhD, I was fortunate enough to study under Dr. Sundar Sarukai, who is a philosopher of science, and Dr. Anindya Sinha, who is a primatologist. So both were my guides. One was studying animals and animal behavior, and the other was looking into texts and translations and conceptual ideas. So I had, it was a very unique, also when I entered into my studies, I started my PhD in environmental philosophy. Now, this was not a subject at all. When I joined, there were no textbooks, there was no way. I just decided I have to do this subject. There was one course I remember in Delhi University at that time in 2005, which was running, which is called Environmental Ethics. And apart from that, there was very little available literature on environmental philosophy in India. There was all this ecosophy and this Bhagwan is God, is nature, and all those kind of things. But there was no rigorous philosophical study in that. And so from there, my journey starts. And because of the interdisciplinarity of the subject that I did, I had to evolve my own methods. Because I'm neither, as a humanities person, on one hand, philosophy has textual hermeneutics, like text analysis, which is like literature, right? And I'm sure Dr. Raghuram Raju has told you about the new trends in studying literature. which is about rhizomatic concepts and network theory, which is coming through Deleuze and other people. And then there's also the other tradition of phenomenology, which is largely impacting experience. So anthropology has got a rich fieldwork kind of social science methodology, and philosophy plays a role in that because there was a literary turn in that also. But in humanities, when you talk of humanities, you're talking about all the current humanities scenario is that you have things like medical humanities, digital humanities, environmental philosophy or environmental humanities, technological humanities. So humanities is being added to a number of words, which means they are talking about the human being in and of these things. So whether it's Donna Haraway's paper on the cyborg or Latour's paper on We Have Never Been Modern, or it is Deleuzian concepts in political science, or the Gaia hypothesis of Latour, all these things are somewhat post-humanities. That's another new thing that I'm hearing of. Environmental humanities has like climate change in humanities, and now we are having post-pandemic humanities, which is so the humanities kind of penetrates. It's like water; it can be added to anything. Chai ke saath mila lo, doodh ke saath mila lo. Add it to anything. So humanities is a kind of a word which says it has something to do with the human, and that's the easiest definition of humanities. And because philosophy itself starts off with the human being as the central concept, when you say environmental humanities, you're going to deconstruct humanities and make it into also include other forms of problems that you're going to think about, right? And so one of the difference between so I'm going to start sharing a screen with you. So here's how the talk will go. First, I will share with you a little bit about the way the disciplines are arranged. This is not only to put in perspective what I'm going to say, but you've been hearing social sciences, you've been hearing you will be hearing social sciences, I guess. You've been hearing about the humanities. You've been hearing about the different methods and the different discipline. And I want to put that in a context for you. And after that, we will talk about some new methods for working with what I call lived concept. Now, I do one thing, something very strange. It's not very strange. Dr. Raghuram Raju also does this, but I'm doing it more in the Indian traditions of thought. I take conceptualizations from pre-modern traditions, Sanskrit concepts, if you want to call them that, or Pali concepts, or Tamil concepts, or the Punjabi concepts, and then translate them into contemporary issues which supposedly Western philosophy is solving, right? So we have this one concept which people all love to work on, dharma. It's been worked a lot on, but most of the time it's not the kind of work I do. I'm working on more metaphysical concepts which are related to nature. So then I will talk about my methodology. I will only share one of it. I have about 4 or 5 which I've followed in various with my various scholars, and then after that I will share some practical. I will share my work. Basically, I'll tell you what I did, and I think doing and learning is the best way to do that. And then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, ma'am, I'm going to share the screen now.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Go ahead. I have made you co-host, so you can share.
I should share. Okay, I hope all of you can see this screen, right? So this is my title. I just thought it's a long title, but I will be going over the title itself. As you know, philosophers like to be very detailed. So we philosophers, I should say, because all of us are. So working with lived concepts in the humanities using philosophical methods. Okay. So this is the title. Right now I'm in Manipal University, Jaipur. I used to work earlier in Manipal University in Manipal, Udupi in South India. Now I'm in the north area. So very soon I'll be visiting Delhi once the COVID goes down. I'll come more often to your programs, and I hope to meet all of you in person too. So, so here's the idea of disciplinary thinking. Okay, yeah, I have this lovely. So basically, when you're talking about disciplinary thinking, I want you to pay attention to this context and concept paradigm. You know, you can see where Raghuram Raju sir's influence is playing on. We love to play with these words, right? So there are certain disciplines that are dependent on content. For example, literature, right? We have literature which is completely content based. And then we have some things which are based on context. And some of these things are like history, right? And then you can have your social sciences, right? Even some of the sciences are also based on, like the natural sciences are also based on content, the boiling point of water, the speed of what is a cell. There are basically what questions, right? Even in literature, you're very much with the text. You can't go, there's parts of literature which go to the context, but most of the time it's literature is about, I remember my teachers going on saying, stay with the text, don't imagine more than what the text is saying, stay with the text, just read the text, be the text. So there's a lot of text content business going on there. Context is actually about the background of something. And when you're looking at the background of something, you're thinking about what is the context of what I'm saying? What is the context? What's the background of whatever? So it can be history, it can be social sciences. There are various different kinds of anthropology, right? All these give you the culture studies, anthropology and cultural studies. All these give you the background of the content. So if a literature is written by Dickens, you would say that a certain period in London or England is the ethos, right? So that would be the context of that. But we will mostly, in the methodology, we focus more on the content. We don't focus on the concept, right? So what we will do is, so we look at the context. First, we look at the content. This is your primary. I'm not saying it is not there in everything, but this is your primary concern in these disciplines. The conceptual content is where this comes in. Philosophy. So it's obvious that when we have methods here, philosophy becomes an overarching methodology. The methods of philosophy are employed in all these and inside this also. Now, what happens mostly is because these are humanities are stuck in concepts. Most of the time when philosophy is going to try its own methods, if you study philosophy, philosophy methods, if you look at the methods of philosophy, you'll mostly look at things like phenomenological method, hermeneutical method, textual method, analytical methods. So you look at analytical, phenomenological. These are all various historical developments. So each time there was a historical development, a new method developed in philosophy. Philosophy as a methodology, is sort of still, when we do our research proposal, when you're doing something on concept, if they ask us what is our research method, what do we write? Many times I keep asking them, what shall I write? Because, our research proposal is designed like a science proposal, right? You write research methods and objectives. What on earth will I write in these two? Because my objective is thinking. So I write thinking about nature. So obviously, so we just make up some nice words which sound like some objectives to analyze and understand the import of nature and its significance for society or something we do. We're very good with language, philosophers. We've read so much of Kant and everyone, so we can make up all these methods. But basically, this is how the content, context and concept paradigm operates in the world outside and in the disciplines too. So this is the disciplinary thinking, and most of the time the methods of humanities and everything these are all very much derived from Eurocentric and Western philosophical techniques, right? We hardly ever use any methods from Indian philosophical traditions. For example, we will never use the word pramana as a method. Pramana is never used as a method because we'll keep thinking that what is this pramana? It is not universal. It is very culture specific, right? So we won't use that. As if Habermas or grounded theory is not culture specific, right? Eurocentric people think that Western philosophy is acultural. Whereas here we are looking at any area studies, philosophy is seen as cultural. right? So we carry the burden, and therefore in a political way also we don't use this. So I wanted to break this paradigm. I wanted to break this paradigm of Eurocentric thinking and wanted to go on to do something better in the in the in the methodologies for humanities. Okay, because my study was basically nature. So now I'd like to go over the idea of what is a lived concept, because I'm sure everyone is wondering what is this lived concept. Lived concept is the concepts that we are living and experiencing and abstracting out of our everyday life. It's become very, very popular now. People call it everyday concepts or lay concepts or naive concepts. They gave it all this name, but it comes from the phenomenological tradition, from the work of Wilhelm Dilthey. Dilthey actually says that human sciences, which means basically humanities, are based on lived experience, which makes them fundamentally different from the natural sciences. And lived experiences of people are the main object of study. Now, social sciences people may also say, hey, listen, social sciences are also lived experiences, but social sciences are context lived experiences. And that's why I wanted to say lived experiences when we are looking at the idea of concept, right? We're looking at the idea of concept and lived experiences as concept. Conceptual lived experiences. How do we move lived experience to conceptual ideas? So lived experience represents not the actual experience, but a representation of the experience. So there's something you undergo. Let's say you're standing under a tree and you experience this oneness with nature and you feel कि मैं पेड़ हो गया हूँ, मुझे पेड़ की छाया में मुझे माँ की छाया की तरह लग रही है. Something, right? We have this, as one of my engineer professors was saying, तुम लोग बहुत ही शेरो शायरी में लिखते हो. So that's the shero shairi is nothing but the lived experience, because poetry captures lived experience very beautifully. But that experience and the choices of a given person. So there is the agency of a human being, very, very important in humanities. Human being is an agent. He is not only receiving the world passively, but is actively constructing the world that he is there. So he makes the choice. So when I go to Delhi, I make an active choice to go to Sarojini Market for my shopping, right? So that kind of active choice that I make is a part of my lived experience. Or if I come, I may decide to go to all the libraries. So my experience of Delhi would be either Sarojini Market or the libraries. Or it could be a college where I'm going for a conference. So many times when we go for a conference, we end up seeing only the campus and then the railway station. We don't get to see the city at all. So our lived experience is the representation. So when we go there and say, हाँ पेड़ ही नहीं, बहुत सारे पेड़ थे, बहुत अच्छा था, and all, everyone will say, no, you haven't seen the actual Delhi, right? So this is the lived experience, and this is how it changes. It changes from every person's lived experience is personal, and therefore how do you make something so personal and individual into a universal method? Because मेरा experience अलग है, किसी और का किसी का सिविल लाइंस है, तो किसी का सरोजिनी मार्केट है, तो किसी और का खान मार्केट है. तो ये सब experiences को मिला के how do you make it into a universal idea? How do you conceptualize this? And that was the trouble that I was having, because when I talk to people who are having experiences of nature, when I looked at nature, people were telling me so many things. They ask, what is nature? You get some 150 people, you get at least 150 answers for that. And how do you understand what nature is for people? Unki bhavna kya hai? Most of them will say things like, oh, I feel nice. So what is this nice? I feel nice in nature. So for everything they'll say nice. So nice kya cheez hota hai? Nice ka bhi koi vyakhya hona chahiye na? You need a commentary on that nice. So you see my difficulty. I'm a philosopher, but I'm working with people's experiences and concepts. So we had to come up, me and my professor had to come up with a way in which I can do the methodology of my study. And it had not been attempted before, because I could be an anthropologist and social scientist and use social science methods. But then I will fall under the social science bracket. I won't be a philosopher, because I want to conceptual study. I can talk about social movements. I can talk about Andolan. I can talk about the degradation of the environment. I can talk about sustainability. They are not philosophical concepts. The philosophical concept is the question of environmental concepts would be the questions of ethics, the difference between the human and the non-human. These are the subjects that are studied in environmental philosophy, environmental humanities. So how do you make that? How do you make that universal conceptualization just using the experience of people? Okay. Lived experience. Another thing is the lived experience is not about reflecting on an experience while living through it. So this is the first thing that Dilti says, that it is not like when you're experiencing whatever you're having the anubhav, it is not that. It is not bhavana, it is anubhavana. Following your bhavana, after your bhavana. Anu usually means after. So it's anubhav, it is afterwards. It is like going to a movie, enjoying, immersing yourself completely in the movie, coming back and writing a review of it. Because when you come back and you reflect back on it, so it's only recollective. Memory is very important. That is why perhaps our texts were called Smriti. Our texts are called Smriti because they're not just the experience of it, they are the reflection on the experience of it. It's a posteriori, if you want to call it that way, from the Kantian point. It's after the experience. Experience is reflected on after it has been lived through. So it is the experiences in the past, and you have to reflect on what has happened to it. So usually in theory, if you're going to make a theory out of it, you would say experience, reflection, and then theory. There's a straight line concept of it. But in my method, we don't use a straight line. We use a circular method. So there's an experience, let us say experience of nature. Then there's a reflection, which is a context. Reflection is the context because you're thinking how I had that experience, why I had that experience. And then you conceptualize it. For example, this is very, very important in one phenomenological method, which is called Integrative Research Phenomenological Methodology, IRPM, Integrative Phenomenological Research Methodology. Okay, IRPM. It's only done in 2 or 3 places. Me and my research scholar, PhD research scholar, Dr. Kalpita Bhar, we worked on this. She had to go to Sundarbans and find out what the people were thinking about land and the ocean. Because Sundarbans are both land and the ocean together. They are sort of all the time there's land, sometimes it sinks under, sometimes new land forms, sometimes the Aila comes, the storm comes and dissolves all the land. So they had a lot of problem. So she went to that place to do field work. Now, she wanted to find out what is land and what is water for those people. What is their conceptualization of land? Because our conceptualization of land is very clear. It doesn't have water inside. There's land and there's water. There's a clear boundary. Ye pani hai, or we used to play, in the pond, on the bank. Aise kuch game khelte the. There's a clear difference between this is water, this is the bank. Ye tat hai, or ye pani hai. So there's a very different. There's a very clear difference between pani and tat. But for them, that difference is not there. And for them, they had a word in their local language, which was waterland. Now that word waterland is a concept. See, in the context of the Sundarbans, how did she come? She would sit with a person and start talking. And she would talk to them about their experiences. Then they'll start talking about their life, the water. They'll talk about the difficulties. They will talk for 20 minutes. And she will keep talking and she will keep asking them the same question again and again. So land means this. So land means that. So land means this. So she keeps on prompting them in the concept because that's the concept we need. We needed a concept for land. And I'll tell you how we came across the idea of how do we get that land concept in their life. It is through the medium of translated. We wanted a translated concept. So we keep asking, land ka matlab zameen ye hai, zameen wo hai in Bengali, of course she would ask. They kept, then finally that fellow said, zameen nahi hai, jol zameen hai. It's like a waterland. And then she asked, what is waterland? And then they started telling her the experience of waterland. Waterland is land underwater. And that land comes temporarily, it becomes land, temporarily it becomes water. So he literally pointed to the middle of the ocean and said, वो पेड़ दिख रहा है, because it was a mangrove, right? वो डंडी दिख रहा है, वहां से 2 feet तक मेरा जमीन है. And he has papers for that land. And that land is under the water. And he said, वो नया land है ना, वो किसी के पास नहीं है, because a new land has risen. वो खाली है. So they're having, the whole concept is, she was looking at the ocean and thinking, where is the land there? But for him, in the season when it dries up, the river becomes less, that land is going to expose. So land is going, so it is jal zameen, it is land, water land. And there's land water also. Land that is always having water in it, so it will never be land. You have to use a boat. So the boat is their home. So their whole idea of land, so when our people go and do policies, they try and build like dams to keep the ocean out, because for them land has to not have the ocean. But the local people have a different concept of land. So when our policymakers, development makers go there, they try and build all these walls against the isla, and the local people say, "Ye to bas dhua hai, it's all like smoke, nothing will work." So this concept of water land, when we found it out, we figured out that the whole life, the way they live their life, their relationship to nature, their relationship to water, their livelihood, everything is based on this concept of water land. And water on land makes different noises. They say when it says shaw, 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 it means you shouldn't go to the river. When it says hush, 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 you should go to the river and bring water. Because fresh water will make a different sound, salt water makes a different sound. So imagine that people have been studying the Sundarbans for so long, land, water, environmental degradation, this, that. It's one of the most studied areas. And we ended up with a concept from their lived experience, land, water, or water, land. Both of which are very unique. And these are not concepts which have come to us from some, Bahar Gaon ka Videshi Admi. They come to us from the villager. So the concept is a lived concept. It takes a philosopher or a researcher to identify that, because we can understand the universal concept idea because we've done all that study. So we know this is a concept. We're not taking everything they say as concept. Shaw, shaw, shaw is not a concept, right? It's a noise that they are hearing. But water, land is a concept. So we can identify concepts because we are well into research. We are already well researched scholars. We know what is a concept. We know what is a universality. So when we reflect on this cycle that we are doing, experience, context, theory, we are applying it to the people and making them to be philosophers. We're literally philosophizing, making them philosophize. So the point is not to be elitist and say only we philosophers can philosophize. Abstraction and conceptualization is anybody's right. So when we break down our whole hubris or our arrogance, saying that only we can do philosophy because we have read Kant and Hegel and other people, and go down to the point that anybody can think, and thinking abstract is philosophy, conceptualization is possible, we can get hold of this lived concept. And when we get hold of this lived concept, the impact is enormous, because then people can start to realize how they can deal with the environment in that place, how they can communicate with the environment. So I remember in my research, when I was going around asking people, I took a set of cards of different pictures and I showed them and said, classify them like playing cards. And they classified the pictures. One person, I said, what about national forest? Then she said, national forest is a park. National park, national forest, national park is a park. So she said, well, that is not jungle. Jungle is where we go to. So for her, pasture land was jungle, not the forest. The forest was a park because all the fellows came, trimmed the bushes, all the forest officers, all the Malis were there. She thought all the forest officers were Malis. So her whole concept of which is a forest and which is her pasture land and it's completely different from what we are thinking. And we are going and doing all this policy, sustainability, all that. On top of it, people are not even understanding. And then you'll end up with a law that says 8 trees per square meter is equal to 1 forest. So that comes because we don't get the lived concepts of these people. So in my experience of working with environmental humanities, I met and talked to a number of common people who shared their stories of nature. And they explained to me their traditional geography and all. When I was doing my early research, I was very much trained in anthropology and social science methods. So though I was taking down everything they were saying, like deep, what we call as deep ethnography, if they said some religious stories or something, I said, theek hai, this is all religion, it's okay. Sacred nature, instead I did, okay, this is, so if they worship the tree, they won't cut it down. So I was very surface conclusions I was drawing, that these descriptive and prescriptive roles, it's good that they are worshipping the tree because they won't cut down a tree that they worship. So that was the kind of research I did in my early time with the methodology. But then my own experience, when I started to do reflection on what they had told me, a more nuanced understanding of the role of rituals came to me. There was a certain kind of eco-cultural experience of the environment that people were having, and I started to work on that. Okay, so Dr. Sundar Sarukkai, who is my guide and professor, he created this method. He mentions it in a paper of his. He wrote a book called Translating the World, which is basically to do with the philosophy of science. But he did this whole idea of that nominal, that he talks about the act of translation. So when he says that when you're translating concepts, right, he's particularly talking about translation of concepts here. He says that when concepts are treated nominally, like name, it's as if it is not a concept that is translated, but they're treated like a label. So, so it is like when you say public, you will say lok. When you say government, you say sarkar. Now, government and sarkar are not equal. Sarkar and government comes from a historical background of governance, to govern, Rousseau, all that, right? Sarkar comes from a leadership quality, a person who is a sort of a leader. It comes from a kingly thing. So sarkar and government, they're treated like labels and they're just exchanged. So it is possible to name an idea and then pick another word in our idea, which is the same. Look at this, batti jalado. Batti is a lamp, diya ki batti hoti. And then tube light is a completely different thing. But we treat batti and light as the same. हम रोशनी जला दो क्यों नहीं बोलते हैं? Light जला दो, रोशनी जला दो नहीं बोलते हैं. We don't say प्रकाश जला दो, we say बत्ती जला दो. Do you see the act of lighting a lamp and the act of switching on a tube light are equated nominally? उनके अंदर की जो भावना है उसके अंदर के experience को हम लेते नहीं हैं. So concepts suffer because we translate them nominally. So conceptualization of translation of concepts is a very difficult thing. This happens a lot in science, right? In science, we have things like temperature, heat, and all, tapman, vagara, vagara. We translate that, and there's a lot of problem because the words that we pick for these are drawn from an already present vocabulary in the language. If so by chance, instead of saying Prakash Jalado, we pick the word Batti to use in our everyday. Batti Jalado. Nowadays, we of course say light Jalado, we tell. But if we are going to be proper, talking in Hindustani, we'll say Batti Jalado. So a particular, so we use it to name. एक तरह की नामकरण करते हैं. It's a nominal concept. So, for example, in places in the word nature, wherever we would use the word concept nature, we would use the word prakriti. Right? So we would use so we would use paryavarana, environment, paryavarana. Nature jahan bhi aata hai, wahan pe prakriti dal dete hain, we put the word prakriti. Wherever environment comes, we put the word paryavarana. So can we say prakriti is nature? Or when we go to somebody and say, ये building और ये plastic है, ये सब प्राकृतिक नहीं है, they'll say नहीं, सब कुछ माँ प्रकृति से आया है. That's what the villager tells me. Everything has come from Prakriti. Because in our conceptualization, in our lived concept, Prakriti is not nature. Prakriti is creation. Prakriti is that from which everything comes. Purush or Prakriti is like the creation conceptualization. Whereas in Western philosophy, nature and human, non-human, nature, non-natural is a very strong differentiation. So therefore, when you just replace nominally, it gets a little bit of a problem then. So translation, therefore, so this Dr. Sarukai said translation is a problem. Translation of concepts, there is incommensurability and there's a kind of essence. It is believed when you translate, the essence remains intact. Okay. So Dr. Sarukai points out that any kind of translation, intralingual, Prakash, Roshni, okay, or interlingual, okay, from let us say Diya to Velakku in Tamil, or intersemiotic when you are looking at two alternative, your thesaurus, when you're using two words which mean the same inside the same, raises the main problem of translation because they are not, there is no equivalence, there's no equality, there's only equivalence. कभी कभी दोनों, जैसे मैंने कहा प्रकृति यूज करने से, when we say prakriti, everything is prakriti, so then the idea of nature is not well understood by people when they read that. So when you read text in translation, especially when you read Sanskrit to Hindi, it is very difficult because Sanskrit में वो बोलेंगे rajas rajasa kritaha, then here they'll say rajas से किया हुआ, तो rajas translate ही नहीं होता. Rajas क्या चीज है, उसका हिंदी translation नहीं है, वही तत्सम, the same word is used. So many times I cannot buy translations of Sanskrit texts in Hindi because they just simply use the same word and then there's no breakdown of what it means actually. उसकी commentary नहीं है. So the idea is any primary impulse that acts as a translation responds to an original, that is as if the word doesn't change at all. वैसे ही nature prakriti बन गया, कोई problem नहीं है. It's just so that is a problem in translation. But I made that problem into the translation problem itself, I made into a method. What happens when you translate is that you change the concept and you look for all the words that you can translate Prakriti into. You take nature and look for all the words in all the languages where something regarding nature, you can use it as a translation. And then look at the conceptual histories behind those words. And then you can understand the various alternative views of nature. So simple. The fact that the concept Prakriti is not equal to nature allows us to develop an alternative representation of nature itself. Instead of similarities in conceptualization, examining the diversity will allow for emergent derivations of environmental ethics. For example, the word nisarga, which is sometimes nisarg bolte na, is used to represent the concept of nature. Prakriti, Purush, Sankhya Yoga se derive hota hai. Nisarga comes from the way things are. Nisarga is the idea of creation. While nature develops from the idea of an entity opposed to human beings, non-human, Nisarga talks about creation. Sarg, it is a created entity. So that means there is something before creation, Swayambhu, self-formed. So it's more similar to the ancient Greek idea of physis. So then you get a different idea of nature. So based on this, I can talk about various ways in which Prakriti can be used to understand environmental ethics. Nisarga can be used to understand environmental ethics. What if nature was actually Nisarga and not what the Western scholars say, non-human? Agar nature was inclusive, what kind of ethics you can have? So that led to my entire PhD was done through the idea of translation. Okay, so here is is the last part of my thing. This is the recent work that I'm doing, Texts and Textualities as a case study in lived concepts. So what happens when you're working with a text, right? In humanities, sometimes we work with the textbook. We don't work in the experience. But the experience of the text itself has a textuality. Like the word nature itself in translation, its meaning itself is an experience of nature. Right? So because we are not reflecting on the experience while it is happening, but we are reflecting on it post our experience, it is possible for us to read something and use the very reading of the text as an experience to reflect on it. So even your analytic or hermeneutics is an experiential hermeneutics rather than just an analytical semiotic analysis of it. So it's a very interesting way, because rasa theory works like that. In literature also, the idea of rasa is also an experiential aesthetic of literature. The area of textuality, as he calls it. So the physical presence is there even in the text. So for me, he's a very famous place scholar. We work on cultural studies and plays. So my work was on, for example, this is what I did. I was reading the Chandogya Kathopanishad. In the Kathopanishad, there was a concept. The concept is Dura and Bhinna, right? So I looked at what, so he says, ignorance is the seed, right? And knowledge is the tree. If you keep a tree and a seed together at the same time, they are different. But if you look at the seed and the tree in a timeline, the seed is nothing but a potential tree. So you can look at it difference as a exclusive absence, that is, some properties are different. And you can look at potential absence as distance. And these two words come from Indian traditions of thought, because Nyaya talks about potential absence and exclusive absence. Then what you do is, using the criteria of difference, we can claim that what is human cannot be natural and what is natural cannot be human. That is different. But potentially, it is possible for us to, if you only say difference, then we are different from nature. There's no way we can be ethical towards it. But if we say we are distant from nature, nature hamara kinship ho jata hai. And so ritual with nature, the rituals that we do with nature are actually fostering our relationship with nature. So isme do teen cheeze yaad aa jati hai. One is this lived idea of distant relatives, right? Lived concept of distant relatives. Distant relatives are not close relatives, but they can become close relatives. Similarly, all the animals are our distant relatives, but they can become close relatives when we look at them with ethics. So this way I work this paper. It's coming out in a Routledge volume. It's called Dura and Bhinna. And so two concepts. Similarly, I'm working with rasa, I'm working with sthala and sthana. I'm working with the words which are to do with the body, deha, sharira, putgala, shava. I'm working with ideas of thinking, teaching, and knowledge. I'm looking at commentary and method. So these are various of the concepts I'm working on using this whole methodology of translation, the problem of translation. And just the problem of translation is giving me so much insight into all the ideas that I have. Okay, with that, I've ended the session. So with what I had to present, I know it's a kind of a very new thing, so I didn't load you with my entire paper, which is very complex. So we can have your discussion now. Ma'am, I'll stop sharing the series.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. The way you have interconnected the concept of context, concept, and content together, that is amazing. We are using it, but it is very hard to conceptualize and philosophize these things. And the way you have given insight, the shift from experience or lived experience to lived concept, that is very unique. I have never ever heard, because I also study hermeneutics, I also study continental philosophy. We all have lived experiences, but we never ever thought about lived concept, which you have just talked about. And you have discussed about the translations as well as the contextualization and textualization of translation. That is really a new thing, and I hope our audience and participants have enjoyed it a lot. Now I would like to invite Archana Verma to reflect upon the whole lecture. Archana Verma, are you here?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, Archana.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, Professor Meera Bandor. I think I correctly pronounced it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, ma'am, for your insightful talk on the topic, working with lived concepts in the humanities using philosophical methods. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and discussing about philosophical methods in the concerned area. And it was because of the interdisciplinarity that you so well covered different dimensions, and you started with the ways in which the disciplines are arranged, and you talked about especially in the Indian tradition of thought, and then you shared your methodology and you shared your work. So, and then you also discussed about disciplinary thinking, where you discussed that literature, natural sciences are completely content-based, and history, cultural studies are context-based. And then you also elaborated this point that content is primary. Then moving further, you then discussed about lived concept, that lived experiences are considered as concepts. And then you talked about this thing that agency is very much important in lived experience, and every person's lived experience is different. Then how to conceptualize or how to give a universal theory then. So and this was very interesting. This was very interesting, because we have our own lived experiences, then how to give a universal theory. So lived experience, then you discussed, that is not about reflecting on an experience while living through it, but is recollective, where experience is reflected on after it has passed or lived through. Then you just through your observations, which you shared, through your examples of land, water, nature, and other such concepts, you made your points very clear. And then you maintain that waterland is a concept. And you also discussed about your guide, Dr. Sarukai's take on translation as method, where you discussed that translation of concepts are very problematic, and conceptual concepts may vary, but nominal concepts do not vary. So this was a very beautiful and very interesting presentation, and thank you for this, ma'am. And so with these words, I may now invite the participants to ask their questions
Yeah.
or express their doubts, or make any valuable comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana, for
Thank you, ma'am.
reflecting upon the lecture. And now the floor is open for questions and discussion. I can see so many hands are already raised. So I'm unmuting Vasudha first.
Okay.
Vasudha
Am I
ji,
audible?
you can yes, you can have your question.
Okay. Ma'am, thank you so much for this extremely enlightening lecture. I've never looked at environment like this before, although I have worked on environment myself in my PhD thesis. Ma'am, I would like to ask you that how do you see environmental social justice as a subject? Because when we think of example,
Ma'am, you've muted yourself.
Vasudha ji, you are not audible. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry about that. So I was asking that when we look at examples like Narmada Bachao Andolan or Chipko movement, or even the more recent the RA project in Mumbai, we see them as political resistance against injustice. And when we bring injustice into the picture, then we are essentially talking about the rights of not just the indigenous people, but we are also talking about rights of the environment. So we are attributing certain rights to the environment itself. And since there is a power struggle involved between two competing, conflicting interests, political scientists, I come from political science background. So political scientists like to see this as a political issue. And therefore, I was wondering that where would you see environmental social justice? Is it a subject matter of environmental ethics, or is it a question of environmental politics, power struggle, or do we actually even need these neat categorizations? Thank you so much.
So can I take the questions together, or I'll just start answering, ma'am?
Whatever suits you, ma'am. If you want to take questions together, it is also possible.
No, I think this question is particular, so I'll take this now, and then we'll see if questions are more similar, then I'll, if they're easier, then I can take them together.
Sure.
So yes, ma'am, it is true what you're pointing out, that the environmental movement, I was myself a part of NABARD. So I'm an activist from Bangalore, and you can't help if you're an activism. My husband is still an activist, environmental activist. So the point is, yes, these categories are what the problem is with environmental humanities. And that's why even now I don't refer to myself as a scholar of environmental philosophy. I refer to myself as a it's a multidisciplinary, it's not even interdisciplinary, it's become multidisciplinary. Because I need to know law, I need to know philosophy, I need to know ethics, I need to know the governance and the structure of who takes, whether it's in the state list or the political list. I need to know who are the stakeholders in the environment. So when I have to do a activist work, I have to look at it in a very holistic way. And so being a philosopher helps, because you can do philosophy of all the things, right? So one of the concepts that would impact the idea of political resistance would be, when you talk about rights of the environment, we ask about the autonomy. There's a paper with Good Pasture also. There's a paper on who is morally considerable. Whom can you consider under an ethical bracket? Do rivers have rights? Do landscapes have rights? So in my own, when we were looking at it, for example, when I started looking at it, I was thinking about Indian conceptualization. That's what I worked. In my thesis, I have said that there is one concept which is very, very, this is again from the lived experience of people, right? Again, when I talk to people, what do they say? Hum prakriti ke god mein hai, wo uski chaya mein hai. So the whole concept is ashray. Prakriti hamari ashray hai. So if I look into the older texts about the concept of ashray, there is ashray and ashraya and ashrita. So when we look at the environment, there's also a very interesting thing. Ethics of ashray is that supposing you kill a king, the punishment is most severe because he is the ashray for so many people. So cutting a tree, which is an ashray for so many beings, is worse than killing a human being who is not an ashray for anybody. It does bring about other social concerns, I know, about a value of life and all. But given a gradation of who is more morally considerable, then you would say that the environment, which is the ashray for so many people, cannot be destroyed because it's the ashray. So in some sense, environment has more rights than the human being who is trying to interrupt it. So the idea of greater common good, so the greater there will become the environment. Therefore, intrinsic value of the environment gets a boost. And so because it's an ashray, usko ashray banne dijiye. Uska ashray pan ko mat hataiye. Don't remove the sheltering nature of the environment. So we have prakriti laya bodies, which is somewhat like the Gaia hypothesis of Plato. The reason I'm saying is it's nothing wrong with political ecology. But on the ground, when you go and tell these people, like we all have learned, we all have whitewashed, we can understand these concepts. But when you go to the ground and talk to people, they don't understand these concepts because it is alien to them. It's from a culture that they don't exist in. But whereas when you say, ye ped itne jeevon ko ashray deta hai, aap isko katenge, they understand. They understand the language of the Bishnois. They don't understand the language of Habermas or Hegel or Heidegger or Latour, right? So that is why I went back to the Indian traditions. I know it is Brahminical. I know the sources are problematic. I know it's a gendered tradition, but still, our people are living in that. So it is possible for us to reform it, to change it, to pull out, to biodegrade the concepts so they are social economic friendly. And Dr. Sundar Sarkar and Dr. Gopal Guru have written a book on the social. And so I'm developing their social and the environment. How can you be social with animals, right? Not only your pet dog in the house, but how can you be social with ants, crows, and all that, right? So that's what I'm working. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Now we have another participant, Kamla ji. So I'm unmuting Kamla ji. Yes, you can have your
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Bayendur. Hello, Dr. Zeru. Yeah. Thank you very much for this lecture. I was the most looking after when I saw the schedule and I saw your name, Dr. Bayendur, listed, because I have been one of the fortunate person while working on my thesis. I have referred to your work, that is Nature in Indian philosophical traditions, cultural traditions. So I understand where is it coming from, and I have also closely followed Dr. Sarukai's works. So I feel really proud to be part of this FDP, and thank you for the organizers to bringing Dr. Bayendur here, so I get an opportunity to talk to her. Having said the fascination that we have common, and the right way, as you pointed out, about the association of human with land, do you again find somewhere it is this diversity of the land which is what is adding to what we are as a person? So being born as a human is probably not sufficient on this planet. Becoming a human is what is a process that probably, whether it is a person from the Sundarbans or whether it is a person from me like Mumbai, the way I try to connect and the way I try to sensitize myself in becoming what I am, probably this cultural diversity, the environmental diversity plays a big role, do you think, there? And secondly, my question is, where comes the point of ethicality, the ethical implication, which has to probably play a big role now, I think so. Look at the kind of Sydney floods. Look at the kind of the whole collapse of the Himalayan, dam which was being built, and the colossal loss that has brought in. Where is the consciousness of engineers, of these people? This is also in sync with what Dr. Vasudha asked. Where is this ecological social justice? Where are we heading towards? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamlaji, and I'm so glad that my work is making at least some impact in the world.
Yes.
Because when I was doing it, I was like, if only one person reads it, it's enough for me. And so there.
It's me.
So yeah, thank you so much. And since I've done that work, I've moved very much ahead of all the things.
I can see that.
Nowadays like that. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that yes, the land and the person. That's why I went to cultural geography. So I'm working on so my next thesis, my next student who worked on environmental issues, the first one was land and sea. The other one has worked on Bidara. Bidara is shifting cultivators, and she has worked on the environment of we are selecting, what has happened is I've started moving towards wetness. So the idea of wetness, right? Because it's not the land, it is the wetness or the dryness and wetness.
The moisture.
Yahweh, what do you call that? Also you call it
the moisture.
Hila Banna,
the moisture.
Yeah, so she has worked, and we have started moving towards the idea of wetness, because it's the air, the land, and the wetness that seems to make you who you are. And a very ancient philosophy of this is given in Ayurveda, and there's only one textbook which is written by a very strange Italian professor. It's called Jungle and the Aroma of Meats. It's something to do with food, landscape, and people. And I have a paper on that, on Indian cuisine of all the things.
Aldo Leopold too talks about this
land ethics and soil.
Yeah.
So we have said that his is still soil, but we are talking about the wetness and the dryness.
Wetness, absolutely.
Yeah. And then we move it to the idea of moisture, because rasa, in all its ability, is very, very important. So they say zameen ka ras apne andar aache. They say ghat ka pani piya hai. That means he has no stable character. So where does this kind of idea come from? So the idea of even when we use the word, the ethics is very interesting, because I found a source for this in Tamil literature. Because when they say that the person is not kind and ethical, his heart is dry. Uska dil sukha hai. So this whole idea of wetness is also ethically connected. So we are still working on it. We are looking for sources and trying to understand what it actually means to say his heart is wet. So perhaps the compassion is that all of us have dried up. Global warming has not only warmed the earth, but it's warmed our hearts. And I think the biggest problem now is that ethics is pitted against economics. Earlier, ethics was pitted against violence and non-compassion. Now, even if I feel compassion, the only way I think compassion can be expressed is by giving some money to somebody. So ethics is pitted against economics. And I think till we start to realize the penetration of neoliberal economies inside us, I don't think it's going to be very easy for us.
I mean, the whole farceness with the sustainability goal concept also.
And so
such a farce.
Yes. And every crisis only widens the divisions in the society. It's not bringing people together. And all of us in the philosophical ethics, I work with a global ethics net, we are struggling to see how we can bring solidarity, because the more the crisis comes, the more people are becoming selfish. And we kind of are returning to Hobbes' state of nature. We are wondering whether Locke was wrong and Hobbes was right. So,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Best wishes to you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meera ji. Now, Raghuram Raju sir, I can see sir has also joined. So welcome back, sir. Sir, are you here? Raju sir?
Sir, Raju sir, Meera here.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. How are you?
Good, sir. Sir, evaluated by thesis.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So I just got to know, sir, that Meera ma'am is also your student.
No. See, they're all very generous people, you know. But I've been.
So I would request our participant to ask question from you. They can ask question from Raju sir as well as Meera ma'am, and you can raise your hand, whoever is there, and they can ask their question. So I requested Raju sir to join us in discussion, because I have received so many mails from participants that they have lots of query to Raju sir regarding Indian philosophy and the way they can interpret and they can reflect upon Indian philosophy in the present context, and they can connect Indian philosophy in the present scenario. So Raju sir is with us, and you can have your questions.
No, but I think we should finish with Meera. Then I think after my lecture we can come to my discussion. No.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, sir. Now, thank you, sir. Now we have Surbhi Unyal. Surbhi, you can have your question.
Good afternoon, all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, Surbhi. Yes, make it a little bit brief.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, no. Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful lecture. It is a kind of a clarification that I would like to ask regarding the last part of your lecture, which was based on the problems of translation. So I was wondering whether creating new words in order to capture the essence of any text would really solve the problem that we are facing in translation. Because whenever we translate something, then we try to relate it to the closest possible meaning in the language that we understand. So if we create new words in order to understand a foreign language, let's say, then in order to understand that translation also, we would need another translation so that we can understand what this word is referring to. I am not sure whether I am going in the right direction or not, but I think, wouldn't it become a more challenging task?
So Surbhi, the point is not to create a new word. The point is when you translate, you use a word which is already present in the language. What I'm trying to say is, instead of just nominally translating, which is a problem, nominal translation is a problem because you just name a word and then you use that word. Like I said, batti and light jalado and batti jalado. So batti is not. So the point is that in cases of, for translation studies and all, they have a lot of work dealing with this. Okay, they have a lot of interpretations. There are theories of translation. But for my work as a philosopher who's working in humanities, when I translate light into batti, I understand what batti is in this. So if supposing I say, I'm just making it up, right? If I say batti jalado, maybe the filament of the bulb is the batti.
Mhm.
See, so when I translate nature into prakriti, then I'm not saying nature is equal to prakriti. I'm saying good, they are different. So when I look at prakriti, supposing instead of calling it nature, if I call it prakriti, what is my relationship to it? It is like, when two brothers get married to two sisters, आज तक हम उसको दीदी या सिस्टर बुलाते रहे, आज से उसको जठानी या देवरानी बुलाएंगे, तो हमारा रिलेशनशिप बदल जाता है ना. Our relationship is changed. So we start looking at the devrani. So then our ethical attitude changes towards the devrani. So that is exactly, so the concept changes when you translate the concept. If you take that concept, what is our ethics towards prakriti? Maybe our ethics towards nature is given by certain kinds of Eurocentric or anthropocentric thought. Maybe our attitude towards prakriti is given by certain other kinds of rights and dharma and, oneness or being in prakriti or some other kind of ideas can come about, right? So that is what I'm saying, using that whole problem as a solution, as a way for ethics. In other places, it will be a problem when you're doing text translation, and they have a lot of, I know translation, philosophy of translation is a huge thing, so I don't want to enter into that. But it is true, translation incommensurability and untranslatability is a big problem. And I'm sure Raghuram Raju sir has also talked about it earlier in some of his writing about how the translation doesn't work so easily. Because he himself, I know, translates from Telugu to English. So,
Raju sir, would you like to reflect upon it?
No, not immediately.
Okay. So let me take another question from, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Runda Anand.
Yes, ma'am, Runa Anand. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, sorry, Runa. Yes. Please have your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for very enlightened us with very new kind of research methods to work on. Ma'am, I have one query. As you have mentioned that this approach is interdisciplinary. In that case, is it possible to apply, as ma'am quoted, to change life experiences in concept, unquoted, ma'am, as a method in discipline of political science? Or, ma'am, we have to change our political issue in a philosophical issue. Like ma'am has mentioned that some topic like government and others, these are specifically dealing with political issues. But something like ethics and all that, it is philosophical issue. So in that case, ma'am, if we want to use your new theory as a method, like to change our experiences in concept, so what we have to do? We have to philosophize our topic, or ma'am, I have doubt that can we philosophize or add philosophical issues or term in every political term? So ma'am, please explain, ma'am.
ma'am, the PhD P is philosophy, so you already philosophized your topic, right?
Okay,
So in that sense, philosophy is a very it's a very wicked discipline. It is there as a shadow in almost all disciplines. So when you're talking about concepts, there are political concepts also in political science. So you can philosophize them. They're already philosophized. Once they're in concept, once they are a concept, they're already philosophized. I know, again, I'm going to throw the ball to Raghu sir's court, because he has done a lot of work in political science also. He's talked about certain kinds of concepts that you can work with. Okay, he also works on Indian concepts and ideas of concepts. I just finished How Do You Debate Political Philosophers with Each Other. He has written a wonderful book on debates in Indian thought. So the point is that because it's a very new method, I think you will have to take the risk of trying to apply it and see whether it works. I'm not saying one method fits all. Other methods are equally valid, right? For example, if I'm going to do India-Pakistan relations or something like that, I have to go back to my old political theories. But what I'm trying to say is, if you're working on concepts, right? There was one professor in Harvard who came and told us that Indians are not grateful because we don't have the word thank you in our vocabulary, right? Hum thank you nahi bolte hain, isliye we're not grateful. So the question is, can we translate thank you into something else? I mean, we do say dhanyavad, but he says it's a later translation. He says originally we don't say thank you, but we're always hierarchical. So hierarchical people don't thank each other. So these kind of ideas which are like very Eurocentric, if we have to combat them, we have to create our own theories to understand our own people. Why haven't our people understood democracy completely? Ashish Nandi and others are also working on this. Why haven't Indians understood the concept of democracy? You know, so maybe democracy needs to be translated for them in a different way. Maybe we need to look at it. So that is what I'm saying, lived concepts. That's why I didn't say it's all in the head. If it's some kind of, if I want to find a word for democracy in India, Loktantra and all that, that's not the point. It's a very textual kind of study. I'm talking about lived concepts. If you go out on the road, does democracy work? And what is the idea? Here, no, they call the Sarkar in Rajasthan, Mai Baap.
Yes, ma'am.
My Baap is not a word. It's how is Sarkar My Baap? So there's a parental attitude towards. So every time something goes wrong, like little children, we start crying, government ne karna, government. Obviously, the relationship is of that of My Baap, of mother and father with the government. We are not having a representative government relationship. We think government is our father and mother. So every time something goes wrong, we'll go crying to the mother and father, saying, this is not working, that is not. So do you see the concept, the lived concept of democracy is very different from the actual political Rousseau's ideas of democratic thought, right? And so that is what I'm saying. So what do we need to do? And I think I've just started. It's just one or two little words that I've picked up. I think more and more people start working on this and start thinking through this, break out of the paradigms of whatever, we just work inside that box which we are put into, Eurocentric or others. I think you just need to start thinking around it. I'm sure you will evolve a new method for political science. So the point is to try methods.
Yes.
Now we have Anshuman. Anshuman, you can ask your question.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, Anshuman, make it brief.
Yeah, definitely. It's not exactly a question, just an observation, a little bit of a question. See, I belong to the literature department, so it's just a kind of observation. What I was thinking was that in the 1960s and the 70s, especially in the humanities, the area of humanities, we had this whole debate about the crisis in the humanities, where we talked about how basically because of the other disciplines and because how things are becoming interdisciplinary, humanities as such is becoming more and more irrelevant, and literature departments generally are kind of in a state of deep decline, and something that we now see in our own campuses. For instance, we have been constantly seeing attempts, to basically think of literature as, to some extent, since it is not something that kind of creates jobs, and because most of the jobs come in commerce, and even the sciences are not exactly, the job-giving kind of area. Generally, the status of what we call humanities is kind of literature department, especially, has kind of gone down. The kind of research you are doing, it interested me precisely because what you're saying essentially is that humanities departments, especially people who have worked with lived concepts, and that's basically the job of the humanities, that we are actually talking about human experiences and deriving our concepts from those experiences rather than kind of imposing a certain set of concepts borrowed from somewhere else. Let's say Eurocentric concepts. So because most of our political class, what we call the class that represents modernity, let's say, that class kind of creates policies, implements policies where perhaps they have to deal with actual people and perhaps understand those lived experiences, which result in a set of concepts which are probably alien to this political class, and therefore the kind of conflict and unrest develops, which of course is a subject maybe not of humanities but of political science perhaps. But perhaps this is the new, I'm just asking whether this should be the new kind of function of the humanities as such, that the humanities department should reassert their usefulness, this whole area, this whole discipline, is to say, has to say, to tell the political class that we are not exactly very relevant, and that we actually are people who are going to translate the desires and conceptual frameworks of the people to you, and you better listen to us, because if you don't listen to us, there is going to be a problem which we are already encountering. For instance, the kind of mistranslations of words like democracy, and the way we think that this kind of urgency within the urban middle class people, that why that ordinary people don't understand us, why is it that the Indian people are so jahil, why is it that they are not able to understand what we are trying to do, and we are trying to put policies which are benefiting them, yet they are unable to understand. And this kind of patronizing and domineering attitude, which we keep on kind of filtering down, and which produces a lot of disaffection, and which can lead to all kinds of in all kinds of political directions. And there might be people who might say, oh, I speak the language of the people, and therefore they are more successful politically, than perhaps people who might have good intentions but are able not to translate their intentions to the people at large. Just a query.
Yeah, you're right, Anshuman. It's true that the humanities department, we are pitted against the engineers, right? Yeah. Everywhere else, engineers tell us, somebody came and told us, you humanities people write too descriptive papers, you should write technical, and you should have a couple of graphs in your paper. And I was like fuming. But the point is also that many of our disciplines have become frozen. If I look at the course structure of all the classes, eco-criticism is a new discipline in environmental humanities. In fact, Klingerman is one of the main persons who has done work on eco-criticism, place studies, cultural geography. So we are not moving forward in our disciplines. Our disciplines have become frozen artifacts. And so translation studies, for instance, is very flourishing in some pockets. And so what happens with these pockets is people don't want to take the risk of, like I have taken a very big risk. I've thrust aside traditional anthropologists and social scientists will kill me if they actually see my paper. Like, what are you doing here? Conceptual translation as method. And then even literature people will not be okay with me, because it's literature and translation is their domain. And here's a philosopher telling you that translation of concepts is like that. So it requires a bit of risk taking, and it takes some real serious work. I'm only daring to say this 10 years after my PhD. I'm not daring to say this before. It requires very deep research. It requires a deep commitment to actually understanding what you're doing. And I think if people want to really make an impact, and the humanities really wants to make an impact, I think the work should show. There's no use of shouting and screaming in the meeting saying we are humanities, we are important. I think once you start working, right now, everybody is calling on all. Right now, the main people who are being called upon are educational, philosophy of education people. Pedagogues and teacher trainers are all being called, because pandemic, at least every day there's a question about online education, right? A few days back, nobody even bothered about all this. They Khan Academy padha raha hai, internet and all. Today, everybody is talking about what it means to teach on screen, what it means to have a digital webinar like this. So digital humanities has just suddenly broken through. So people, I think what we need to do is to strengthen our own roots and also start taking risks in doing some kind of research, read other people and keep updated. I know between 10 classes and going to the lunch and then figuring out your question paper moderation, it's very difficult to do research. But if you can manage to do that, that's how we have to survive. I mean, sometimes you have to outperform in order to survive. And I'm sure, I think also I've seen that a lot of my colleagues have stopped reading. After PhD, they don't read any books at all. I mean, every day there are lots of books being produced, but at least the ones that you follow, you read the latest books. And I think that reading habit has disappeared. And I think it's not the fall of the humanities, but the fall of the thinking and reading in all disciplines that has gone. So I think thinking and reading, if you start doing, I think we'll recover. I'm sure humanities will always be there. It's a shadow. I mean, we may not be there as a big department, but without us, they cannot do. So don't worry.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Meera ma'am, for such a lovely presentation and the way you have answered our audience and participants. It's amazing. Now, moving forward, I would like to invite questions and queries for Raju sir. Participants can ask question to Raju sir. And they can raise their hands. Tehseen. I'm just unmuting. I'm trying to unmute Tehseen. Okay, there is some problem. I am unmuting Archana. Okay. Okay, Archana, you can have your question.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, Archana, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, sir, it's just a small query. When you discussed about the thing that inquiry as the mode of philosophizing in Upanishads, and where you hold that inquiry is not merely open-ended, as there is a predicability. So, sir, will you please elaborate this point, because I missed it? That what does it exactly mean when we say that inquiry is not merely open-ended? Thank you, sir. Sir, am I audible, sir? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Archana, you are audible. And
Okay.
I think Raju sir.
Is he not there?
Raju sir, you are not audible to us. Raju sir. Let me try on phone and I'll get back to you all.
So I should come in and say, please read Dr. Raghuram Raju's books on modernity. And he has a book on epics, ethics, and ancestors. There's a very nice book on that. He's interrogating modernity, and he's also done this face-off between Indian philosophy and Western philosophers. And his books on K.C. Bhattacharya also are very readable. So we formed a group and we read his books together.
Oh, okay, ma'am. What was the name of the book, ma'am?
I think it is called Interrogating Modernity.
Okay.
And okay. I have a poor memory for exact words, but
That's fine. That's fine.
And then there's another book, I think, Debates in Indian Philosophy. So what he does is he says that Raju sir says that you can take Savarkar and debate him with Gandhi and take their ideas and face them off with each other. So he does an interesting thing by picking up people who are different periods and different contexts.
Yes.
But he puts them together in the same thing and has this debate. So it's a political science book. So it's a very interesting way to bring these people who are otherwise not there. Right? Vivekananda and Gandhi, for instance, he gave a lecture on that. Like Gandhi and Vivekananda. So they're not actually talking to each other in real life, but he makes them talk in his book. So that's a very interesting book that he wrote. And the latest book is about this Deleuze and others, bringing them in conversation.
Already discussed, I think.
Yeah, so that I think he would have talked about. Sir, ma'am? You're muted, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just trying to call Raju sir, but I think he's busy. I'm just trying it again.
But then I got my answer.
Okay. But you can have your answer
Yeah,
again
sure.
once Raju
Because
sir.
I gave ma'am the books that sir has written. So
Oh, that's wonderful. So nice of you, Meera ma'am. This is the benefit. If you are a student of a teacher, you know most of the aspect of your teacher
Yes,
and
yes,
studies.
yes.
So just a sec.
Yeah. Now we can join.
Yes, yes. Hello. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome, sir. I just recommended Interrogating Modernity on your behalf to someone. So
Wonderful, wonderful. I would invite Archana again to ask her questions so that
Oh,
we can
okay.
have benefit from Raju sir as well.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, so sir, when you discussed about Upanishad, so there we just got discussed that the prominent theme of Upanishads is Brahman, and then, according to you, inquiry is the mode of philosophizing in Upanishads, and there you hold that point that inquiry is not merely open-ended, as there is a predicability. So, just there is just a small query, and I just wanted to make this thing clear to me, that what do you mean when you maintain or when you hold this point that inquiry is not merely open ended? So Meera ma'am gave an answer to this, but since you're here, so what is your take on it, sir? That what do you mean when you say that inquiry is not merely open ended? Thank you, sir.
Okay, let me just answer this by giving you 3 instances.
Yes.
The first instance is that if you recall, first sentence of Rousseau's Thus Contract, it says, "I mean to inquire."
Yes. Yes,
So
sir, yes,
when
yes.
Rousseau says, "I mean to inquire,"
Mhm.
it means that he doesn't know what is the conclusion.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Okay.
an inquirer is the one who doesn't know what is it to is inquiring. There's a lot of uncertainty, open-endedness.
Mhm. Mhm.
Inquiry qualitatively different from discovery.
Mhm.
Okay, you discover things that are already there. You don't inquire into things that are already there. Hello? An inquirer is the one who does not know completely what is the arrival point of the inquiry.
Okay.
This is one thing. Now, contrast it with teaching. Now, when a teacher begins to teach to the student, now you have a situation where the teacher knows what is the take mathematics. The teacher of mathematics knows the solution to the problem that he is or she is solving.
No.
But no, a teacher who is teaching mathematics to students know the solution or not?
Yes, 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 definitely.
So he knows the solution.
Yes.
But will he give the solution in the beginning or at the end?
At the end.
So what should he do at the beginning? He already knows the answer.
Yes.
But he has to pretend he does not know the answer, only to make sure that students will go along with him or her. That's what we all do as teachers.
Yes.
Okay. So now we pretend as if we don't know the answer, so that you, the student, get the student into the mold of education. Now here you have a different situation. And that different situation is that, unlike in the first one, where you do not know what you are inquiring,
Yes.
you know what you are inquiring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know what you are, solving. Yet you tell this to students. So there is a difference between inquiry in teaching and inquiry in inquiry, per se. Okay. Now, in the case of Upanishads, it belongs to the second type. None of them would say that Brahman is not permanent.
Yes.
There is no Upanishad who says Brahman is not permanent. Everybody says Brahman is permanent. So that means they all have decided, the conclusion exactly like the mathematics teacher knows what is the conclusion.
Conclusion, solution.
And for the sake of the student, okay, the teacher does not just give what is a solution, but takes them from premise and various stages of proofs, and then there is a conclusion. So it is something called enacting. Why do you enact? There is a purpose for enacting. The purpose is to take your students under your fold so that the student learns. Particularly in, if you carefully observe the teacher's training, the entire teacher's training is based on the second thing. Okay? Elementary teacher should not tell students all that they know. Then the student will not, learning. You have to, like a drip, you have to give them little bit. Why do you do it? So that the learning takes place. Okay, that is the difference.
I think
it belongs to that second type of inquiry, which is, do you find that generally speaking, there is an open-endedness in teaching mathematics? You know the conclusion and you arrive at the conclusion. See, if there is a genius who might find a different kind of thing sometime, that's a different matter. But largely, you already know the conclusion.
You already know.
Okay, but that's why in Upanishads they already know the conclusion.
Fine. Now this is clear. No. This is clear to me, sir. Thank you, sir. So now I would like to invite Surbhi. Surbhi, you may ask your question now. 1 second.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, Surbhi. Just go on.
Okay, thank you. Sir, you have already answered one of my question, because she has already asked, like, how can we apply the method in our everyday life now? Another question that I would like to ask is, how can we apply, yesterday we talked about how we can use Western literature in Indian politics. So I would like to ask how we can apply that in this contemporary era. Like, what would be a good example for that?
The good example is, there are not just one good example, there are several of us. Now, all of us are trained in Western philosophy.
Yes.
So we can continue to do Western philosophy. But then I found that would not get me anywhere because, there are stalwarts doing Western philosophy. I will not be anywhere in contributing. The other one is to come to do Indian philosophy. And where I find that, it is not that easy for me to be very creative in Indian. So what I do is I use frames to present Indian themes. But I said it's modern frames and pre-modern themes in Indian philosophy. So I set, I read Deleuze and Guattari, set a frame. Sometimes the frames are long, doesn't matter. They're not sleek frames. They're not long. And then begin, for instance, Gandhi. And then you have another instance where I read Deleuze and Guattari. I read Deleuze and bring in the idea of a non-being from India, both in Upanishads and in Vajracharitas. Okay, this is another way. The third one is that I look at a very important modern institution called old age home. And I find that the old age home is rampant in the West. And they are entering into India. So they have not completely entered, but they are not also not entered. So now I look at how do I understand old age home and the life of old age home? Who is the person who laid the foundation for this old age home in the West, where it is rampant? And then I find in Rousseau the first foundations for the institution called old age home. And where do I find it? I find it in the second page of his social contract, where he says that family is the oldest institution. In the family, the biggest relation or prominent relation is between parents and between father and children. He doesn't say parents. Okay? That's why feminists have blasted him, and rightly so. Okay?
Yes.
And he says that father has to spend time and resources on children till they become adults. And once they're adult, the bond ceases, and then they become independent. And children then don't owe anything to the parents. Now you see, is there any problem with this?
No, sir, it's fine.
I see a problem.
Okay.
I see a problem because I now bring on to the table of this argument the designation of Rousseau as a social contract philosopher. So what is the minimum thing that is there in a contract? In a contract, one person enters into contract with the other person, and there is a two-way dealing.
Yes.
I give you something and you give me something back in return. Yes or no? It is not benevolence. It is not gratitude. Okay? It is not love, sympathy. No, it is a contract. In love, sympathy, benevolence, gratitude, the relationship is one-sided. That's why Tolstoy says in Anna Karenina that we love those people more than those who love us, which means love is not a transaction. Those people whom we love, we don't love them because they love us. We love them despite they're not loving us. That's why, the gratitude towards, this is a different kind of a moral principle that runs. But in a contract, you don't enter into one-way contract. Then it's not a contract. Contract means there are two people who are transacting a transaction. So A enters into contract with B, and A gives something to B, and then B gives something back in return. Is that clear? Now, look at this passage where you have father giving things to children, his children. Are there? Their time and resources. But do children give anything back to father? So why is it a contract? And why are people who are students of Rousseau did not see it in the world, not in India? You see the point that I'm making?
Yes.
He's a contract philosopher, then it must be two relation. In this passage that I read to you, there is only one-way relation. If it is a one-way relation, why is it a contract? Suppose if he makes it a two-way relation, then he relapses into traditionalism. And what is traditionalism? Children who are benefited by the father spend their time on the father when he is old. Okay? That brings us into circularity. That's what happens in traditional society. People parents take care of children, and then children take care of
Parents.
the deal is done. But here you have only the father taking care of, in fact, it is a hopeless situation. How does father know how to take care of children? It's a horrible childhood, if father takes care of children. I'm not trying to burden mother only. Both the guys should do it. But then it will be horrible despite an underlying subtext of patriarchy in this argument, if only the father takes care of the children and mother is not there. Then that's what Rousseau commits in this passage. And now, if, for instance, he makes them to take care of parents, then they will not be available for production. I don't want to ask the question, how many of you are ready to take care of your parents? That's a very, blackmail kind of question to ask. I wanted to invert that question, as I said, counterfactually, and ask the question in the following way, which is, how many parents would be willing if their children say that we will stay back with you and take care of you and not take our job? How many parents will be willing?
Very few.
Do you want? No, do you want as a parent, your children, if they are there, otherwise even if they are not there, they will be in future. That it happens. If they say, Mommy, I have studied, you've taken care of me. Now I want to take care of you. I will live with you at home and not take up a job. How many of you will be willing?
Personally, I won't be, maybe.
It is not only personal, it is collective.
Yeah.
Don't be just, modest.
Yes.
Sir, you are not audible.
Sir's connection is frozen, I think, ma'am. Sir, are you back, sir? Yes, sir. We lost you just after you asked the question. So you're muted still.
Yeah, I'm connecting, sir. Yeah, I'm connecting.
Okay, so where did I get this?
So how many of us will be willing to have our children be in our own house? And
Yeah, how many of you? And why not? So that's because we are under the trap of Rousseau. In the initial time, those people who leave the family to work are given what is called as salary, which in Arabic called tanka, which means compensation for a punishment. It's a punishment to work. Today, anybody would call working a punishment. So that is a U-turn that happened. And the person who made this U-turn is Rousseau. And he is there in everybody's library, but you have not read them. So this is another example. It's a long answer. So that's why don't ask questions to me, because I bore you with this kind of nonsense.
Okay, let me take another question for you, sir. It is by Jobin Thomas. Jobin, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nisha. Thank you, Professor Raju, for your both the lectures. They were indeed thought-provoking and informative. So I have two questions, one from both lectures. And first one is just a historical clarification regarding Indian philosophical tradition. So my question is, what happened in the 18th and 19th century in India where Indian philosophical tradition was recast, recompiled, and refracted through the debates between Orientalists and the nationalists and all that. So what happened there? So you mentioned that you were not so enamored by the Atman and the Brahman relationship as the foundationally interesting thing in Indian philosophy. So if that is the case, what happened in this moment? I was wondering whether you would like to clarify. One. Second is, since your lecture itself was very provocative, I want to provoke you a little further by asking, when you talked about minor literature, rehabilitating the notion of bending the notion of minor literature for India, you were talking about Thoreau, Tolstoy, and Ruskin. But in the Indian context, wouldn't you say cinema is the real minor literature? It is a collective art. Cinema. When we are talking about
Cinema.
The true minor literature of India, because it's a collective art form, and it, especially with the arrival of talkies, movies like Parashakti, for instance, it created a political engagement, a social engagement, which was hitherto unseen in the subcontinent, perhaps. So I would like you to think about it, because it would be very interesting, I thought. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for asking this historical. The first question is historical. See, I think I just want. I think this Atman and Brahman, are very important questions. I have no problem with that, and I don't want to rob them of their importance. I wanted to add to this foundation an operational aspect which was muted at that time. That operational aspect is the inquiry. Now, read Atman and Brahman as an inquiry and read Atman and Brahman without inquiry. Just put, two different sheets of paper and then reread Upanishads. You will find that in the later, that is, reading Atman and Brahman discussion with inquiry, life comes back into Upanishads. Whereas in this Atman and Brahman without inquiry, it's like a dry wood, which you can make furniture, but then there is no life there. So I am not enamored by the furniture, I am interested in the life. If you think, you are more interested in furniture, all the best. There is no problem with that kind of thing. And then see that 18th and 19th century, I just want to refrain from making judgments about anything, because I believe that you not only learn from positive things, in fact, your learning becomes several times doubled from learning from the negative things. Okay, so if the others came and distorted, as Edward Said and other people have made a life out, professional out of it, you deserved it.
I think again connection went, ma'am.
Sir is here. Sir is here.
Yeah, hello. I think,
Yes,
I
yes,
use
sir.
my cell phone. I'll use my cell phone. I think there's some problem with this connectivity.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, what am I saying? Yeah. So, what is Orientalist? What is the criticism of Edward Said and Orientalist? Edward Said is saying that the Occident, the outsiders, have constructed self, you, Orient, and that is a construction, and that does not, and whatever, whenever they studied India, for instance, they studied it from the Eurocentrism. That's what is called as Eurocentrism. That means Europe studies India for their own political gains. That is the allegation by those like Edward Said. Now, I find this thing very useful. I don't reject it like the Orientalist and other people have rejected. No, the post-structuralists have rejected it. I found it a very useful thing. What I do is, again, I bend it without breaking. What is he saying? A studies B for C. Is that what is there? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
A studies B for C. Suppose if B studies A for C, will Eurocentrism have any objection? I'll repeat again. Eurocentrism is doing the following. That is, A studies B for C. That is, Europe studied India for their colonialism, political gain. Suppose I don't change I accept the format. I change the contents. That is, India studies Europe for politics.
There is a problem. There is a problem.
Why is the problem? Well, they have done that. Can they stop me if I do this like this? No, keep the rules of the game static. If you are studying me for politics, you should allow, using Kant's categorical imperative, my studying you for politics. What stopped Indians from reading Western philosophy for their own politics? This is exactly what I'm doing. That is, whatever I do, I read Deleuze, I read Kafka, I read Rousseau, I read Derrida, all these people, following the format of Eurocentrism, not abandoning it like other people did, for the sake of India. Do you have any objection? Should we have any objection? Why did we not do it? We completely, missed a great opportunity given to us ready-made by Eurocentrism, and then kept our time criticizing it, rejecting it, and in the process producing Eurocentrism only. We have not done any work for India. And if you do work for India, you are not doing it because of any other traditionalism or whatever it is. It is following the Eurocentrism. Yeah, this is something like that. So I have that kind of a thing. See, when I say that Indian national movement, Thoreau and other things, about your second question, I was not saying that, you can do only, that is the only example, and then I will close it there. You can keep on adding. As Deleuze says, addition is liberation. You add cinema, you add something else, all the best. You are following the path that I am following. I hope, it makes some sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much, Meera ma'am, for such a wonderful discussion. I hope our participants have benefited out of it. Now, I would like to invite Nidhi ma'am to deliver a vote of thanks to our guest speakers. Nidhi ma'am.
Yes, thank you. So on behalf of Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to Professor Meera, as well as Professor Raghuram Raju for sparing their time and delivering such an interactive session with all the participants. A special thanks to Professor Raghuram Raju because he, despite having a very tight schedule, he came for this interactive session just on the demand of the participants. So thank you so much, sir. And we are really indebted to you, Raghuram Raju sir and Meera ma'am. Thank you so much.
Now we have our next speaker, Sanjeev sir, with us. Sanjeev sir, are you here? Sanjeev sir. Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You
Yeah,
are.
right. Yeah.
Namaskar, sir. Namaskar. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome here.
Yeah.
So, Nidhi ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please, welcome. Deliver a welcome.
Sure. Okay. So a very good afternoon to our respected resource person for today, Professor Sanjeev Kumar, and all the dear participants. I welcome you all to the second session of the day 5 of this online 1-week faculty development program on philosophical methodologies in higher education, research and teaching. So today we have with us Professor Sanjeev Kapoor, and sir will be delivering a lecture on philosophical methods in social science in the post-empiricist era. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar is Professor of International Relations and Global Politics at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. He has previously taught at the South Asian University, SAK University, the University of Allahabad, and the Karnataka University, Dharwad. His areas of interest include Islamic thought and international relations, Islam and the West in contemporary global affairs, the representation of Muslim identity in Hindi cinema, and the history of ideas in South Asia. He has published extensively in reputed journals as well. He is the co-editor of an encyclopedic volume on modern South Asian thinkers that has been published by Sage India, New Delhi. Presently, Professor Kumar is working on his forthcoming co-authored book entitled Deconstructing Islamophobic Public Culture, Hindu Nationalism and the Muslim Other in India. He is currently leading a project on popular imaginaries and discourses on politics in India. We heartily welcome you, sir. I now request you to proceed with the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, so I thank Zaironisha and the organizing team of Ramanujan College and the Department of Philosophy, Delhi University, and my old friend Balaganapati for having me here. So what I will try to do here today is, first I'll switch off this software, otherwise it will keep on disturbing. Just give me 1 second. Otherwise, people will enter, exit, so it will keep on speaking.
Windows D, desktop, full J, JAWS 17, cursor, JAWS 7X, JAWS alert, enter. JAWS context, men X, leaving menus, alert, Somni campus, join, cancel, OK button, enter. Escape.
Okay. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
So, yeah, I'll keep asking because I don't want to get confused. So normally when we talk in terms of social sciences, we have an age-old debate, not very age-old. Say, for example, it's a 3 or 4 centuries old debate, which has intensified after Enlightenment, in the post-Enlightenment era, as to what is the foundation of knowing the society? What is the foundation of knowledge about knowing the society? So basically, the debate has been between looking from the perspective of the individual, or say the entire society, or looking at the perspective of the knower and the known. So this will be another set of debate. Then there is also a debate between idealism and realism. And there is also, most importantly, the debate between knowing things in an empirical manner and knowing things through a more abstract metaphysical way, as what to put it in a Kantian way, as noumenon and phenomenon. So my lecture would be focused around these debates, because social sciences are still grappling with those debates. And even till today, we are still grappling with those debates in terms of positivism / post-positivism, rationalism versus interpretation. So whether we should know through rationalism or through interpretation. So this is another kind of a debate. So I will just focus on these debates, and my lecture would be somewhat historical, as well as, trying to focus on contemporary debate. So I'll start drawing from ancient and medieval philosophy and try to connect it to the ways in which the notions of knowledge has been conceptualized. So the running theme of this whole lecture is post-empiricist approaches in terms of looking at philosophical methods, and why do we need to frame it as post-empiricist. So that would be a significant question that I would be discussing. And as I said, underlying this entire lecture would be one single word, that is meta theory. So I'll begin with meta theory. So normally the question, when we look at the debates, as I already said, between the Cartesian debate between subject and object, that it is conceptualized in terms of Cartesian dualism, and then the subsequent debate that was raised by David Hume and Immanuel Kant, and the neo-Kantian and the phenomenological transitions that actually look at this whole notion of the subject and object. Then, as I said, the second significant thing is between agent and structure. So that is individual versus the structure, whether we should learn through just knowing structures as given, or you need to look at processes in terms of individual intersubjectivities and interactions. So that is the second thing. Then there are other debates, as I said. Idealism, realism is one significant debate that's always significant to social sciences. Then there is, as I said, rationalism versus interpretation. That's another debate. And positivism and post-positivism. So let's keep all these 4 to 5 debates in mind, and then try to do what we are here to do. So it's already 4:10. So I'll try and speak up till 5:10 max, and then we can have at least 20 to 25 minutes of discussion. So that's
Sure, sir. Wonderful.
As I said, the underlying this entire theme is meta theory, and I'm beginning from a very simple question. Do we actually need philosophers? Why should we poke our nose into philosophy? Like somebody like me who teaches international relations, and in our wittiest of imagination, so we would never think that like a person like doing our India-Pakistan relations, why did the US invade into Afghanistan? These are some of the questions that I interrogate, or why terrorism is named in terms of Islam, and why 9/11 happened. These are the practical questions that I actually deal in my own research. But so the simplest question my friend like Balaganapati can ask you, why do you want to poke your nose into philosophy? Or he can also pose in a different way that you are not looking at philosophy, that's why you are not getting proper conclusions, or your method is not right. So this debate has often been there. And that debate is all about meta theory. Now, what is meta theory? Let's clear the air. So we all know meta theory is like a theory of theory. And we all know that we need a theory to begin with. So let's come to philosophy later on, but at least in social sciences, be it a political scientist, student of political science like me, or a historian, or a sociologist, so we all know that we use some sort of a theory. But there again, there lies a catch. Everybody may not like to use theory. So before addressing whether we should use theory or not, or whether I have some passion for theory, I like to bring in a significant debate that was raised by C. Wright Mills, a sociologist, in his book Sociological Imagination. So the question that C. Wright Mills was raising was very pertinent to what was happening in the 40s and 50s. Now, of course, he was looking in terms of sociology, and his vantage point, his reference point was largely Talcott Parsons, who actually wrote on social systems, which C. Wright Mills framed as what we call as grand theory. Now, what is a grand theory, and why is it relevant for our understanding of philosophical methods? So normally, when I say grand theory, it's always claims to be universalistic in character. Like the grand theorists claim that whatever suggestions and whatever framework that they have proposed, that normally is applicable for the entire world per se. So irrespective of spatio-temporal circumstances, so those theories cannot be contextual in character. So they don't believe in a hermeneutic adjudication of those theories. They don't believe in a hermeneutic adjudication of those theories. Rather, they believe in what can be called as a homogeneous empty time. So there is a homogeneous empty time wherein that those theories actually work. So that homogeneity and emptiness of time is basically universalistic in character, something like all society is driven by structures, as what Durkheim says. So these are grand theories which cannot be subjected to, as I said, the spatio-temporal circumstances. They are hermetically sealed and tableted commodities, which you cannot put to, as I said, hermeneutic adjudication. Now there lies, say for example, the question of meta theory comes in here. Now, as I said, meta theory is a theory of theory. So whenever we pick up a theory, we need to know how that theory developed, how somebody like Newton sat in a particular space and thought that the apple would fall on his head. It was not an instantaneous reaction on the part of Newton that, okay, suddenly the apple fell and you actually, found out that, okay, apple falls because of gravity. There was some sort of thinking which was already going on, and there lies the idea of meta theory. The Newtonian realization or the Archimedean realization is always driven by meta theory. So even in social sciences, any realization or any theoretical formulation has to be put to, if not hermeneutic adjudication, at least metatheoretical adjudication. So what is this metatheoretical adjudication? The metatheoretical adjudication means, as I said, there is a theory of theory. And as we all know, if you want to understand what is theory of state, say for example, or theory of human nature. So Hobbes had a more self-centric perspective of human nature, which was underpinned by the logic of competition, as compared to a more civic republican self of John Locke. So there is a theoretical perspective in which you look at human nature. So in that sense, or when we look at the theory, we also know why Hobbes, what was his issue? His issue was not that he was like wanting to celebrate conflict, but there was a situation where he was compelled to theorize in terms of what he called as civil science, what Quentin Skinner calls as civil science. So Quentin Skinner was just looking at reproducing a Thomas Hobbes was just trying to reproduce a neo-Aristotelian idea of politics. And the neo-Aristotelian idea of politics is the city-state where citizens actually engage with each other, and that engagement is actually done on the basis of what we call as civil science. So Hobbes was trying to reconstruct the neo-Aristotelian idea of that whole idea of what we call as civil science. And he was looking at a situation where 1648, 1642 to later on years, it was highly rebellious in character, bloody revolution, and suddenly 1651 Leviathan comes. And when we look at this, then we are struck as to why Hobbes actually wrote in terms of giving up all his rights. An individual should give up all his rights on the condition that the other will also give up to that almighty Leviathan. So why the almighty Leviathan was created, except giving up the right to life? So obviously 1642, the threefold struggle which Hobbes was seeing between the Protestants and the Catholics, the people who wanted to get representative government versus the existing feudal monarchy, and then, of course, the mercantile economy and the rising capitalist enterprise. So this was the threefold struggle which he actually calls as the state of nature, which was driven by the logic of competition. So whenever we read, even in a neo-Derridean sense, when we get down to the double reading, so when we deconstruct and engage in a double reading, then obviously we come to know that there is some sort of ontology, epistemology, and methodology which was inherent to Hobbesian thought. This is what we call as meta-theory. Meta-theory is a combination of ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Since most of you are students of philosophy, so let's not get to the basics of ontology, epistemology, and methodology. But so to bring in a coherence, every theory is built in terms of the theorist's imagination of space and time, history, time and space, that is his geography, his or her geography, that is ontology. Then the idea of knowledge, the nature of knowledge, epistemology, and the ways of, gathering information, methodology. And this is where every theory is constructed. You cannot have a theory without what you can say meta theory. Then no theory, you cannot claim any theory in this world, be it the most empiricist formulation, as being bereft of meta theory, that is ontology, epistemology, and methodology. So obviously we cannot escape philosophy. Social scientists cannot escape philosophy. This is where I go back to what C. Wright Mills was trying to argue, where he was looking at a grand theory which was very universalistic. And most of the time, when we talk about meta theory, so grand theories in a way have these strong metatheoretical underpinnings in terms of their own maybe Eurocentrism or ethnocentrism, but they claim to be universalistic. There was the problem for Mills. Now, there is another problem. On another extreme, there are abstract empiricists. Those who will say, okay, I'll take North Delhi, interview 300 students, and say that university students all want to wear dresses like Akshay Kumar and Katrina Kaif. So these 300 samples, I will establish that it's for the university students. So this is another part of the problem. So both extremes are problematic. And when an abstract empiricist actually does this survey, he or she would come back to a grand theorist and say that, we don't want to engage with meta theory. Because why should we be concerned with the nature of being, existence? How does it matter if somebody wants to wear a t-shirt like Akshay Kumar? How does the existence phenomena matter? Or what is the nature of knowledge? These are high sounding philosophical questions. Somebody like Fred Halliday, theorist of IR, would say that, okay, let's leave meta theory to the philosophy departments. Now there lies the question, should we abandon meta theory? Abandoning meta theory means you are completely abandoning philosophy. So abandoning philosophy means you are not even wanting to look at philosophy of science. I have had a great challenge for last 15 plus years since I've been teaching philosophy of science to my students. They consistently come back to me and question, look, how does Karl Popper's falsification and Emile Lekato's protective belt, all this, how does it matter to me when I'm looking at a panchayat village in Rajasthan? I said, there lies the problem. So it is just like trying to drive a car without knowing the basics of driving. So philosophy is often considered to be, most of them philosophers also called crazy because they are in a different world. They have their own cosmos, and normally they are considered to be utopian, and the word utopia is subjected to a very bad interpretation also, bad usage also. So normally philosophers are not taken seriously in terms of policy. Especially the policy makers would say, and policy makers, academicians and the philosophers, if you want to categorize these three, then the policy makers would say, at least academicians like the theorists would say how to deal with Pakistan. Of course, they may not agree or disagree, but how does a philosopher's idea of what is the world would help a policy maker? Now, these are the questions which ultimately render, that is why we are having this FDP today. Now, this is a very relevant question which has been raised by this program, because rendering philosophy just to the philosophy departments is as good as saying that science is not relevant to society. Now, science, I cannot say they are only limited to laboratories. Whenever a scientist says that, okay, everybody would come back to us and say that, okay, when I say science, I'm using the term in terms of the academic distinction of faculty of sciences. Of course, philosophically, I have a different notion of science. So whenever a physics teacher or a scientist or a chemistry scientist, though they are doing something in their laboratory, but we all think that, okay, it will completely impact upon the society. But whenever philosophers would say something, then obviously we would come back to us, why do we want to read Plato? Why do we want to read Hobbes? And why do we want to engage in this question? Like philosophers will engage in a question, what is happiness? What is sadness? So these are very abstract questions. But should we engage with them? Now, this is what the question is. And this is where the idea of meta theory comes in. So now, when grand theory was questioned, and this is where, we are looking, grand theory emerged in a time of a post-empiricist era. I'll come to it in a moment. But another sociologist who was critiquing C. Wright Mill's treatment of Talcott Parsons was trying to bring in an alternative, and the alternative in terms of looking at what we call as mid-level theories. So he framed the core notion as mid-level theories. So now here, the idea of meta theory becomes even more intense and deep. It becomes more dense, because the idea of meta theory means, as I said, ontology, epistemology, and methodology. Now the question is, do we have multiple ontologies? Do we have multiple epistemologies? And of course, do we have kind of methodological anarchism or epistemological anarchism or multiple ontologies? Say, for example, now we are talking in terms of relational ontology. So when we are in an era where we are talking in terms of multiple ontologies and relational ontologies, so obviously the question of ontology also becomes a specific phenomena. It is not located in a homogeneous empty time. The Heideggerian engagement with ontology, Heideggerian engagement with ontology, when he was trying to build up to the hermeneutic circle, so the idea was to bring in the way in which your existence, but is there a single existence? The post-Heideggerian, when we try to critique Heidegger, and then coming to Gadamer, when he was trying to look at the fusion of horizons. And when we was looking at fusion of horizons, obviously the link between history, present, and future, the way in which the post-Heideggerian philosopher Gadamer actually tries to link it. Now, the problem here is in treating ontology in terms of Heidegger and Gadamer is, where is the question of multiple ontologies? Now, say for example, if 1642 was terrorizing for Hobbes, 1642 was a glorious period in India where Akbar was almost, trying to, the Mughal Empire was trying to set its feet in India. So this is where the whole idea of looking at what we call as existences actually differ according to different societies. There lies a significant question which Robert K. Merton was raising. So when he says about mid-level theories, he was not just attacking grand theories and trying to agree with the C. Wright Mills, but what Merton was also trying to do was to bring in a critique of the abstract empiricist and trying to find a via media way between being empirical and not also give up the question of ontology, epistemology, and methodology, because meta theory doesn't matter to the empiricists. Now, it is this very question of what is the problem with empiricists which I would like to try and do. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
You are.
Yeah. Okay. So now, when the whole idea of knowing, so it's a long history which, because of the paucity of time, I cannot actually look at, but in a simple sense, we all know Auguste Comte actually divided this whole trajectory of learning or knowing in terms of metaphysics, theology, and then science. So when we were trying to know through metaphysics, there was like Socratic notion of ideal as real, where knowledge is always what was imagined as ideal. So that is in terms of what we look at as the metaphor of a perfect line of Plato. So then the whole idea of the Catholic idea of the geocentric trajectory of knowledge, where there was 3 layers, heaven and earth. So this very idea of knowing completely was coming from somewhere else, where the individual did not have any agency. So the individual was just, you know, in a Augustinian sense, he was always feeling guilty and confessing. So Augustinian confession. So the whole notion of knowledge was linked to the confession because of the first mistake which Adam and Eve actually committed. So when we look at that theological sense, then in the third stage, we are looking at enlightenment, and enlightenment actually brought back the agency of human nature. Now, as I said, linked to this are 2 significant questions, the 2 significant debates, that is about, you know, positivism and post-positivism and the agent structure debate. Now with Auguste Comte, the very idea of positivism began to strengthen. So we all know that history, the way in which positivism actually began, from then the Vienna Circle and the likes of Wittgenstein and others, the way in which they introduced language. So positivism and empiricism, these were significant approaches to understand or to know. And Cartesian anxiety, what we call as a Cartesian anxiety, that actually prevailed upon us till the Neo-Kantians were actually trying to bring back speculative philosophy. Now, the Cartesian anxiety and the skepticism of Hume, there, when we look at the way in which Immanuel Kant actually tries to balance, there the contribution of Immanuel Kant becomes very, very crucial for somebody like me. When the Cartesian anxiety with knowing only those things which were reliable. What is reliable knowledge? If I can't say somebody like God, something like God. So where is the reliable knowledge to know about God? So when I can't know, then obviously, then I'm anxious about it. You know, I watched a movie, Khuda Ke Liye, a Pakistani movie, and it was an amazing learning experience, although the Maulana, a very important character in that movie, so he was actually reasoning with one character in the movie, where he was actually asking many questions to the cleric, saying that why should we do the namaz in this way? Why should we? So he asked a simple question. जब औरत से प्यार करते हो तो दिल से सोचते हो, मतलब तब दिमाग नहीं लगाते हो. खुदा से मोहब्बत करते ही दिमाग लगाने लगते हो. Now this is where the Cartesian anxiety comes in. जब दिमाग लगाना शुरू करते हैं, when we start using our brain and you don't get the answer, then Cartesian anxiety prevails, where the notion of separating the subject and object becomes imperative, because when you don't separate, then obviously you will only do everything through your dil. So obviously the subject and object must be separated. You आप दिल से सोच ही नहीं सकते हो. And by the time we look at Hume, the initial way in which we try to understand knowledge, where there, skepticism becomes important. But for me, the transcendental idealism of Kant, as compared to the absolute idealism of Hegel, becomes very, very important. And the neo-Kantian reinterpretations have been very, very crucial. Of course, that is why Immanuel Kant, we at least, we all know, we call a Copernican revolution in the philosophy of knowledge. And the critical thinking actually began to evolve, and then Karl Marx, and then subsequently we go to critical thinking. Now, beginning with this critical thinking, the idea of knowing through inquiry. Now, the idea of inquiry becomes very, very crucial. As I said, when I start inquiring, okay, they say that God is there, and I start inquiring. Vivekananda also did it initially. But of course, metaphysically, then he realized it, then things became different. But when Vivekananda was meeting Ramakrishna Paramahamsa in his early days, so obviously he was using his brain, reason. The use of reason, anything which do not appeal to your reason, ultimately becomes a Cartesian anxiety. So let's not get into the details of Cartesian meditation and anxiety, but what I'm trying to say is the idea of reason and revelation. Now, this has always been a significant debate for theology also. If you want to look at Islamic philosophy, for example, this troubled, there was a Cartesian anxiety at those days also. Now, what happened by the 8th century, when the four rightly guided caliphs, after that, the caliphate, the succession of the caliphate was politicized. It was politicized by a person called Muawiyah, and then subsequently sectarianism also set in, and then, of course, rest is history. So caliphate became more imperial. And when it became imperial, the debate was, now there was no first generation Muslims, the Sahabis. So when there were no Sahabis, then obviously everybody wanted to know where did the Quran come from. Because till the death of the Prophet, nobody compiled the Quran, everybody remembered it. Then later on, when it was compiled, the debate was, there was a fierce debate between the Ash'ari philosophy, Ash'arites, and the Mu'tazilites. The Ash'arites believe that the Quran is an uncreated work. When we say uncreated work, it is completely spiritual, metaphysical. The Mu'tazilites said somebody wrote it. It is a written work. And of course, Al-Ghazali in the 12th century settled the debate in favor of the Ash'arites in the 12th century. So what I'm trying to say is the way in which, if we treat Quran as from the perspective of knowing, as Quran itself says in Surah 31, Quran is the book of wisdom, hikmah. So in that sense, we need to understand that if the Quran itself says that it's a book of wisdom, then there is a notion of reason also. And there is a, even if you want to go to the Sunnah tradition, the very idea of, learning from the stories of the Prophet. Once Prophet actually was like, when he appointed Muawiyah as the governor of Egypt, he asked Muawiyah that how will you rule? Or so when you get a very critical situation, how will you deal with it? So Muawiyah actually said that, okay, I will try to get an answer from the Quran. Then the Prophet said, if you don't get an answer from the Quran, then I will ask you. If I'm not there to ask. Then when Muawiyah was silent, Prophet said that use your reason. Now here lies the debate between reason and revelation, which was very much prominent, and there lies the tilt towards methodological literalism that happened in the 17th century with the Protestant reform, Martin Luther and others. Then the way in which Francis Bacon, he was influenced by that, and then knowing through a scientific way of knowing. There we can say that there is a debate. Earlier the debate was something different. If you look at the Neo-Aristotelian and the Neoplatonic ways of knowing, which was the Neoplatonic ways of knowing was very, very influential in the 8th century Islamic philosophy also, the early Islamic philosophy. So Neoplatonism, when we look at that, metaphysics dominates, and there was no debate because idea was real. And then when there was a geocentric manifestation of that knowledge, everything was like Augustinian confession, where somebody is trying to control you. I am a bad creature, so somebody is trying to control me. So I have to be under the control. And church became the mediating institution. So, but what happened? Once enlightenment happened, metaphysics did not go anywhere. It is very much wrong to conceptualize that now there was no importance of theology or metaphysics. Post-enlightenment, it's an era of a kind of pluriverse where science, metaphysics, and theology are contesting for hegemony. I can be a Gramscian here. They are contesting for hegemony. In the sense that when we try and look at what we call as the authority over knowing and learning, who has that authority? Now, Paul Feyerabend is a master of doing this. Of course, he was largely criticized for writing that book Against Method, but that was one of the most provocative book. So in a way, he was completely critiqued in the sense that Paul Feyerabend said, there are various ways of knowing. There is science, metaphysics, there is alchemy also, there is black magic also. So in a simple sense, if somebody says that if somebody is acting crazy, so psychoanalyst would say that, okay, I know the answer. And somebody who believes in Tantra Vidya, he will say that that's black magic. And the same black magic, a psychoanalyst would say, it is post-hypnotics. Now, who has the control over society? Now, there lies the issue. In the Neo-Aristotelian sense, the control over the society to disseminate knowledge was with the individual capacity to know. That is, virtue is knowledge. And we all know what is virtue, the highest good. So let's not discuss it. It's a simple thing that we have studied in our graduation. Once church took over, the authority to disseminate knowledge was completely interpreted through the biblical notion of the original sin. The original sin became the strategic vantage point, the original sin and the consistent need for confession, Augustinian confession, because of the original sin. That became a significant trajectory of knowing. And then science. Now, Paul Feyerabend says that scientists, now here the idea of science or scientist, again, I'm deriving from the academic designation of the faculty of science, biology, botany, zoology, biotechnology. So they are always saying that we don't talk nonsense. Like for me, they can call I'm talking nonsense. There is nothing relevant to society. They say that we don't talk nonsense. We experiment in the lab and then we give results. Metro train comes, everybody is benefited. We created the metro engine, so we are all traveling by metro. What does Sanjeev Kumar achieve by talking hours and hours and hours together about India and Pakistan? Nothing will happen. Now the issue is the way in which empiricism dominates. Why does empiricism dominate over metaphysics? Now there lies the debate. As I said, once Cartesian anxiety took us all, completely, as what Foucault says, we all think that mankind was born 300 years ago. Before that, there was no mankind at all. So in that Foucaultian sense, we also need to understand that every knowledge is driven by power, right? There is a construction of discourse. In that sense, what I'm trying to say here is the way in which we are trying to conceptualize empiricism as the most hegemonic. Now, I am using the word Gramsci in terms of hegemony. Now, the difference between mythology, science, history, archaeology, alchemy, black magic, for Paul Feyerabend is very, very thin. Maybe somebody is ill. You go to a doctor, he puts an injection. You are all right. So doctor will say, science saved him. Then I go to an Ojha. He will hit me with a jhadu. Everything will go away. The Ojha will say, this is completely something metaphysical. Now, who has the authority over knowledge? Why are scientists thinking that they are the only privy to knowledge? That is a problem which Paul Feyerabend says, and at the heart, this lies at the heart of what we call as problems with empiricism. Now, where did this anxiety, as I said, ever since we are completely plagued with Cartesian anxiety, we are all, fall in love with empiricism. So when I was doing PhD, people used to ask, I did everything on a secondary literature, quote unquote secondary literature. Secondary literature in social science is nothing but books, journal articles. So people used to say, I do very good research because mine is empirical. Their chest used to become 56 inches. When they say empirical, they used to say, what is your research? We are going to the field. I spoke to 100 people. They said, dam should not be built. Hey, Baba, 100 people. How do you get a result? That is abstract empiricism. As what C. Wright Mills says. Robert Merton's mid-level theory is somewhat a via media solution. But before I come to that, let me again just dig into history. As I said, Cartesian anxiety made us think about reason. I think that is why I am. So reason as foundational parameter to judge knowledge. And then David Hume's skepticism ultimately led us to, think in terms of, reliable knowledge. So whatever we see, we have to be reliable. So as I said, if I don't see God, then there is no God. What Kant did, as I said, is very, very crucial for us. The high age of speculative philosophy, why do we say that it almost ended with Hegel? And the neo-Hegelians, basically when we look at Kant, it looks more balanced because of his notion of noumenon and phenomenon, where the subject and object and also the agent and structure, that is, Kant is not taking the society as given. But Kant is also emphasizing on intersubjective meaning of processes, the notion of identity and intersubjectivity among individuals because of the noumenon. Because we have our own imagination and we also have an empirical notion of the world. But that empirical notion of world, the phenomena, is not a given one. We also assign meanings to it. So Kantian reframing of space and time, that's what he does in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. So he completely reframes the Cartesian idea of space and time. And Cartesian idea of space and time was, in a simplest sense, like everything beyond my body is space and time. So space, I'm not part of it. I'm determining what space and time is. Immanuel Kant tried to make an interface between the body and the existence, somewhat later well developed by Merleau-Ponty in his The Idea of Body and Interpretation. So that is where Kant's contribution for me is very, very crucial. And in his critique of pure reason, the way in which the idea of bringing in an intersectionality between what he calls as pure idealism versus what we call as practical knowledge, transcendental idealism. That's why it is called transcendental idealism. So even for Aristotle, for that matter, practical knowledge was important, but there is a metaphysical quotient to it. Now, the idea in social science is about ideal knowledge, or what you can say, imagined things, and the practical knowledge. This is the debate between the positivists and the post-positivists, or there is a different kind of a debate between idealists and realists, as I said. So the subject-object divide was conclusively dismissed in a way by Immanuel Kant, which is my beginning point and a very significant contribution for me, at least as a social scientist, when he brought in this, like the idea of not taking the given forms of structures, the critical foundations, like what is enlightenment? The classic question that he raised, enlightenment is the transition from our own self-imposed immaturity. So that self-imposed immaturity is about accepting the given forms of structures. So here, at once Kant is bringing in what we have been doing since the 1980s and 90s. He did it almost 200 plus years ago. He's trying to resolve the agent structure problem, which is very crucial for us in philosophy today. Which is ontologically more important, whether the structure or the agent. But Kant was assigning an equal ontological status to both. And this we have realized in the 1970s and 80s. And the resolution of the debate between positivists and post-positivists. So I'll come to it. Everywhere I assign Kant. Of course, we can have a critical debate on this also in our interaction session. But for me, Kant, in a way, was through his idea of social contract, based on which we are seeing the Rawlsian notion of social contract in the 20th century, Kant was actually trying to resolve so many debates which I am trying to argue here. Of course, these are 20th century debates which I am trying to say. Positivism and post-positivism. As I said, post-positivism emerged as a reaction to Cartesian anxiety and the problem with inductive science. And Karl Popper, through his three significant works. Now, the logic of scientific discovery, where he actually brings in this notion that, whatever can be falsified, that is science. If you can't falsify anything, that is dogma. Then his notion of history, poverty of historicism, where the Hegelian history was completely, critiqued. The Hegelian idea of history, the development of spirit, where Hegel was looking at the development of the modern civilization, that is in terms of the development of the spirit. That is what he called as the end of history. Hegel's end of history, where teleologically he completely concluded the way in which the spirit actually evolves through a process of what he calls as the cunning of reason. Then the way in which Popper actually critiqued Hegel, and also in one of his other book, Open Society and Its Enemies, he picks up Plato, Marx, and Hegel particularly because of his historicism in terms of assigning that significant space to history, where Hegel was very, very clear that, like somebody like Napoleon did not make history, rather history made Napoleon. So in that sense, Hegel was critiqued by Popper in terms of his historicism and also his, teleological notion of the end of history, where the state emerges as the highest form of human community. Like we all know that the Rousseauian notion of family, like the most ancient form of community or institution, and the transformation that family and then the society and then the state, the dialectical ways in which the family and society interact with each other and form the society, that is where teleologically Hegel tries to establish. And this Hegelian teleology was critiqued by Popper, and that kind of a critique can go back to again Kant. And Kant, of course, the most cosmopolitan of our philosophers. And we all know Kant did not even go away from his hometown. The whole of his life, he stayed in the same town where he was. So if you compare somebody like Pufendorf, he traveled across but ultimately ended with statism. But because Kant did not travel much, he was a cosmopolitan. So that's, sometimes you may get exposure to many things, but if your open mind is not open, then so Kant is the best example of that. Or Pufendorf, who is an ardent statist. So, as I said, in the 20th century, with the idea of falsification, the empiricist philosophy, positivism, inductive science, they all began to be questioned. Because what had happened during that time, too much of empiricism and a critique of speculative philosophy, and then the advent of analytic philosophy, Bertrand Russell, and then the Wittgenstein and Wittgensteinians. So obviously, the idea was to just know through like the reliable source of knowledge. You cannot sit in a particular place and just imagine. And the first reaction to this, as we all know, Edmund Husserl, who actually began with he was trying to react with the neo-Kantian reassessment of what we call a speculative philosophy, and where Husserl was trying to bring in the idea of knowing by suspending your intentions. So he was trying to critique the neo-Kantians by critiquing the idea of what we call as intentions. Now Heidegger brought in the question of ontology. But before that, Husserl, he was transforming. And by the time he wrote the Crisis of European Sciences, then obviously he was trying to look at the critique of empiricism and positivism. Now this was a time where the debate was also between the idealists and the realists, where the question of ontology and the question of epistemology became very, very critical. For the realists, the question was very much epistemological. For the idealists, the question was very much ontological. How should the world look like? And how the world is. So, in that sense, the debate between the idealists and the realists, and then the debate between positivists and the post-positivists. Do norms and values have any space in the knowing? Do you have to associate any normative considerations to knowledge? If you ask, if you are still plagued with Cartesian anxiety, then you're obviously, there is no necessity in terms of what you can say, bringing any normative considerations, because reasons do not demand any values. Immanuel Kant, in a way, resolved, as I said, through his transcendental idealism, was right getting into the heart of the debate between positivists and post-positivists. So, most of these debates, which I'm trying to argue, for me, was considerably resolved and settled long back by Immanuel Kant. What we are doing today in terms of, say, for example, the impact which we are looking once critical theory comes in. Critical theory has had a major impact, especially when we look at the work of Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, who were like, through their work, Dialectics of Enlightenment, they were trying to bring in the neo-Kantian critique of modernity. So for Kant, the problem was not modernity. He wanted capitalism. But the problem was something cultural. So there has to be a link, difference between the cultural man and the economic man. So this is the philosophical question which Immanuel Kant was trying to look at when he was trying to critique pure reason. So that is why ethics for Kant was very much deontological. And there, the very idea of social contract, when we look at, say, somebody like John Rawls' theory of justice, and the way in which Rawls brings in this veil of ignorance and the social contract, there again, of course, you are looking at what ethics, of course, in meta theory, metaethics is also part of the debate, but it is not extensively used. Ontology, epistemology, and methodology is more often used as part of what we call as meta theory. So in this sense, the 20th century for me, when I am trying to look at, and even going beyond 20th and 21st century, where we all have been studying these debates, behavioralism also was a candidate for about few years, but behavioralism ultimately did not succeed much. And by the 60s and 70s, when Thomas Kuhn's notion of incommensurability comes in, this whole notion of incommensurability and then coexistence of many paradigms, the idea of Kuhnian idea of science, there lies what we are seeing today. So the debate between idealists and realists, the debate between, say, positivists and the post-positivists, and Popperian debate between inductive and the deductive logic. All these are part of what we call as the post-empiricist methodological debates in social sciences. Today in social sciences, we all are still grappling with those debates. Grand theory versus abstract empiricism. So Quentin Skinner talked about the return of grand theory in the 1980s, but yeah, the way forward for me is mid-level theories. And why the mid-level theories are metatheoretically suitable, and also it does not completely debunk the idea of philosophy of science. Now, what has happened in social sciences is 80s and 90s, like what happened with the mad craze for scientism, we completely abandoned the philosophy of science and it ran into course. That is, it ran into different wrong direction. Now, when we say philosophy of science, the Popperian logic of falsification completely is thrown into thin air when we say that, scientific knowledge is perfect. Because for Popper, there is no perfect knowledge. Similarly, for Kuhn, what we say, scientific knowledge is, if something is found out in some particular era, it remains forever. No. Had that been the case, we would have never come out of Aristotelian physics or Newtonian physics. So today we are in a post-Hopkinian physics, which is where Stephen Hopkins, whatever logic he had established, we are trying to critique it. So science normally develops in terms of, we all know, normal and revolutionary science. And there is always an era where exemplary science is created, but it doesn't remain exemplary. It remains exemplary, say Einstein, Nobel Prize, that was the era. Now Einstein is not exemplary. So the era of exemplary science is cyclical. It doesn't stay forever. So the nature of scientific development, it is not a cumulative growth. It doesn't grow in a cumulative fashion, what Thomas Kuhn says. The problem with science is, as I said, we need to understand that scientists are anti-democrats, as what Paul Feyerabend says, because they want to keep the authority of dissemination of knowledge on to them. And most of the methodologies of scientific research program, as what Paul Emer-Lakatos says, are like, governed by positive and negative heuristics. What should we do and what should we not do? So every methodology of scientific research program is like a protective belt. So the original hypothesis is like the protective belt. You don't want it to be broken, because your whole methodology of scientific research program would collapse. So rather, what would you like to do is to create auxiliary hypothesis and keep on justifying it. That is why science is not a perfect truth. This realization, if we give up, if we don't accept, then obviously we think that 2 + 2 4, fine, that is ultimate knowledge. What do we need today? As I said, in a post-empiricist era, even scientists have their own prejudices and norms. And to end, I would like to say the best example of a post-empiricist idea of knowing has been presented by none other than E.K. Ramanujan when he wrote a very provocative essay, Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? So we all should read that piece where he raises this question and answers it in about 6 ways. So ultimately, comparing his father, who got up in the morning, wore a dhoti and then did his puja, then put on his suit and went to the laboratory. That is the Indian way of thinking. That is, spiritualism and empiricism can go together. Normally, when things get into political ideologies, obviously, like Marxists don't believe in God. And they think that intellectuals should not get into rituals. So people, whenever they say, by accident, if they call me somewhere and I say that, okay, I'm on fast today, they say, how did you become a professor? Why did you become a professor? You should have gone to a temple and become a priest. Now, this is a very weird argument. If I am professor at Delhi University, that doesn't mean that I should not have a small mandir in my home and I should not do fasting and puja. Now, doing both, when you launch a satellite, you are in the Tirupati Mandir. This is the Indian way of thinking. And this is the answer to Immanuel Kant, which I want to give. Because normally, it's not that I am trying to celebrate Immanuel Kant. Of course, most of the debates were resolved by him. But the best way to resolve that debate is through A.K. Ramanujan. It resolves, this one essay resolves all these debates, agent versus structure, the subject-object, Cartesian dualism, realism, idealism, positivism, post-positivism, all these debates, rationality versus interpretation, all these debates tend to get resolved in one single essay, that is of A.K. Ramanujan. So now I thank the organizers and also all the participants for a patient hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zarinisha.
Thank you so much, sir. I must say that it's very interesting and illuminating lecture, touching upon all dimensions of philosophy and philosophical problems in various subjects related to social sciences and sciences. So before we move for the, what you call, questions and discussion, I would like to invite Archana Verma to reflect upon your lecture, to brief the lecture. Yes, Archana, you are here.
Yeah, I hope I'm properly audible.
Yes, yes, Archana, go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, sir. Thank you for this interesting talk. And thank you for sharing your ideas and discussing about the philosophical methods in social science in the post-empiricist era. So in this lecture, you posed questions like, what is the foundation of knowing the society? And you pointed out that there has been a debate about the perspective of knower. And there has been a debate between knowing things as noumena and phenomena of Kant. So we assign meanings to phenomena. And then you also considered Kant's contribution as very crucial. And you have considered transcendental idealism of Kant as very much important. you further emphasized on meta theory. Meta theory is a theory of theory, and there you discussed about meta theory as a combination of ontology, epistemology, methodology, and maintained the point that this is where every theory is constructed. So philosophy, then you maintain that it deals with abstract questions, and this is where meta theory comes in. And sir, through your lucid examples of C. Wright Mills' grant theory and Hobbes' threefold struggle, you made us understand your points very clearly. And you also referred to this Mills' grant theory for our understanding of philosophical methods. So, moreover, through your example of this Pakistani movie, Khud Khuda ke liye. So you elaborated the notion of Cartesian anxiety. So there must be a separation between subject and object. So for you, the idea of reason and revolution, the idea of inquiry is very much then crucial. So thank you, sir. Thank you once again for such an insightful talk where you touched upon so many dimensions in a very interesting way, I must say. So thank you, sir.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you so much, Archana. Now we have the floor is open for discussion and debate. Participants can have their questions and their comments. Yes, we have Dhananjay. Dhananjay, I'm unmuting you. You can have your question.
Thank you, Professor Sanjeev, for your very comprehensive lecture. Just to
you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. Just to understand how do we reconcile Kant and Ramanujan, because the concept of self, the way Kantian self is possibly not present in Eke Ramanujan. So this is one thing. And second, how do we, can we have only this spiritualism and empiricism alternative, or we can also think in another direction, particularly in dialectical manner? Thank you.
Okay. Should I answer or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Thank you, Dhananjay.
After that, we will take another question.
Okay. You're right. Kantian self and Ramanujan self is different. So, but yeah, that's because Kant can never be, as we all know, an exemplar of morality. So basically what we practice, but A.K. Ramanujan was trying to look in terms of practice. So like if you want to mediate Kant and Ramanujan, can we mediate in terms of Gandhi, where you act as what you speak. Say, for example, if I love puja and then if I hide it, then obviously then the satyagrahi will completely run its course. Satyagraha will run its course. Now the difference in terms of the Kantian self, Kant was again coming from that capitalist enterprise, the culture of capitalist enterprise, where the self was, again expected to be a methodological individualist as well as realize his or her duties. So Kant was trying to reconcile the Lockean, what you can say, Hobbesian methodological individual who was not much concerned in terms of this whole idea of, he was more concerned in terms of the idea of the right to life, to the Rousseauian self who was more concerned in terms of the larger civilizational goals of the community. Of course, Rousseau's self and the reconciliation between this Rousseau self and the Hobbesian self gets exemplified in the way in which Kantian social contract actually happens and deontological ethics comes into picture. Now, what Ramanujan is saying, of course, Ramanujan comes from a very different epistemological background, where Ramanujan was trying to look at the way in which the idea of Indian self, our own self, was getting constructed in terms of the way in which we have been imagining that I imagine myself as part of, say, Rama, and I see Rama in myself if I want to go do good deeds. that kind of a integration of the spiritual and individual morality. That is the universal spiritual morality in the which is enshrined in which is manifest in, say, the ideals of Ram, and my own individual morality. That reconciliation happens when I emulate Ram. So this kind of an emulation doesn't look in terms of Kant. For Kant, you need to have a duty-bound ethics, because you know you are not violating your traffic signal because you have to give 500 rupees. You try to realize that you want to wear a mask because I don't want to infect Dhananjay. This is the realization. But beyond that, there is nothing called a spiritual idealism. This is where I know there is a problem in reconciling both, but of course we can have a longer chat later on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Dhananjay, for your question. I also have a question, Sanjeev, sir.
Yeah.
My question is related with your comment which you have made, and that is very significant comment, that Quran is a book of wisdom. When you interpret, you said that the meaning of Quran is a book of wisdom. And it means that when we talk about book wisdom, wisdom is always associated with reason.
Yeah.
It means it is a book of reason. So why people connect Quran or any kind of holy book, especially I'm talking about Quran, that this is the matter of belief and you should not put your reason into it because it is something which is associated with your iman. So reason is always, people always try to separate reason from these scriptures and holy book. So can you reflect upon that? Why it is so? Why there is always a discrepancy or irony associated with this thing? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Zairunisha. So I recently was writing on do we need hermeneutics in Islam for the canonical texts. Now, this is not something new which I am saying. This has been like what people like Jalaluddin al-Afghani, Muhammad Abda and Rashid Rida, they were trying to argue in the 19th century when the onslaught of Oriental imagination and Western imperialism actually struck upon the Islamic world. They were trying to reconcile the way in which, like, we have to go with the times, modernity. So the idea of engaging with modernity itself is a big issue whenever it's not just about Islam. This is where faith and reason is a larger question which comes in terms of acceptance, rejection, and celebration of modernity. So it's a larger question which we need to pose. The transition, the time always changes. What is modern? Let us not debate it. Like 10 centuries earlier, that 10th century may be modern for the 7th century. So we are living in 21st century. After 300 years, they think that we were ancient or medieval. So times keep changing. The idea of keeping a text as a tablet, something which has just come down directly from heaven, like imagining the archangel Jibrail bringing a text and handing it over to the prophet, and then the text remaining constant. Of course, somebody has written it. So the problem in, as you said, people try to impose that you should not use your reason. That has a specific history, because after the 12th century, when Ibn Taymiyyah actually, saw that even the Mongols became Muslims and they started ruling according to the Islamic strictures, he said that they can't rule like Islam, like the Sahabis. So they don't have the, acumen to do that. So obviously he defended fitna, which is very much opposite to jihad, we all know. So he was the first he proposed a legitimate defense in favor of fitna, because he says that if somebody is ruling in the name of Islam, but they are not fit to rule in the name of Islam. And that is where the bureaucratization of the ulema began. Of course, it had begun in the 9th century only, but once the even people like Ibn Taymiyyah started using new Aristotelian logic and then bringing in this whole idea of the Hadith methodology, as what Wael Halak says, there the need to keep a particular form protected, that becomes very, very crucial. So this is where, the idea of interpretation becomes a problem. Can we interpret Quran according to our own issues? So that is what has not happened in Islam. If you see, even in India, the Deoband, when it came, it did not, they wanted to preserve that antiquity of the Islamic text because they did not want to do interpretation. So this idea against interpretation for me is nothing but bureaucratic, just to preserve the interest of a particular class. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It's really a wonderful answer. Now we have Kamlaji. Kamlaji, I'm unmuting you so that you can ask your question.
Hello, good evening to one and all. Thank you, Zairunisha, for including me into that. My question was also connected to what you were asking to Dr. Kumar. Dr. Kumar, earlier to this answer, you also mentioned about the deontological ethics relating to the so-called the Indian identity that is coming down from the Ram image. Don't you think so? Kant's deontological ethics comes more closer to the Gita concept of Nishkama Karma Yoga, rather than looking at the Ram's image and coming up with a where again is this trajectory moving in Indian context when it comes to the change with modernity? Where do you see the trajectory moving? Why is the Gita concept of Nishkama Karma not being idealized and taking it from the duty for the duty sake point of view? And where is this modernity trajectory affecting the psyche of the Indian?
Gita dissolves the self into the Brahman. Kant doesn't do it. That is a major difference. Kant, yeah.
Not exactly, isn't it? Again, it is talking about the life problems. It is talking about the relationships. It does talking about rationalizing one's role, one's responsibilities. So it's not like harping on dissolving one's identity only into Brahman. Yes,
No,
that is the theme. That is a theme. Yes.
That is the theme. From the other theme, you do a Nishkama Karma because you know that you are not the, आप सिर्फ निमित्त मात्र है. You are just the instrument, just a kind of instrument. You are not the end in itself. The end is something else. But a Kantian self is an end in himself. So the Kantian self,
true,
although he was sociologically determined to work for the society as a duty, but the Nishkama Karma cannot be reduced to a Kantian judgment. Gita's idea of Nishkama Karma is very dense and deep, because there the empirical world is just the way in which the Almighty has put you in a particular role.
Correct.
You have to go about it. When see, Nayanam Chidram Trayam Shastram. There, the outwardly manifestation of yourself is not as critical as our inwardly selves. So, the Nishkama Karma comes in because we all know that there is a trajectory created already. Of course, in a Kantian sense, this is a given knowledge. For him, for a critical thinker like Kant, he says that this is a given knowledge, why do we accept it? But for somebody like me who want to go the spiritual way, I would say that विद्या से विनय मिलता है, विनय से पात्र मिलता है, पात्र से धन मिलता है, धन से कर्म करने का वो मिलता है, कर्म से धर्म कर सकते हो, धर्म से शांति मिलती है. This is the trajectory which Gita sets for you. And this is where Kant differs. Your path is determined again in the logic of competition. Kant does not go beyond the Hobbesian logic of competition in his social contract. And Gita is not a social contract.
Correct.
That is the difference.
Superb. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have next question from Ravneet Kaur. Ravneet, I'm unmuting you. You can ask. Yes, Ravneet.
Am I audible, Dr.
Yes,
Zarin?
Ravneet.
Okay.
Go
First of all, sir, this was very, very erudite lecture. And in fact, I'm not from philosophy. So, of course, I was trying to connect the dots in between. And please, I already apologize if I'm not able to use the terminology that you people are using. So I'll try my best to question, what is.
Me, Dhananjay, we are also from political science. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know, but you guys are very, very erudite.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question was also related to what you were just talking about. I was trying to understand, because what Dhananjay talked to you right now, and again, this last question. I'm binary in terms of Eastern thought, and about Kant on one hand, and then Gandhiji, and then Ramanujan on the other hand. And how do we place the idea of becoming in all of this? Because idea of becoming is also part of Western thought, and is not idea of becoming in individuality. If it's like, if you somehow achieve goodness and value in individual self, through idea of becoming, then ultimately you're going to, because you're part of a social system, and you are citizen too, of society. So you do contribute to society at large. Also, if you are becoming better in some way, and there is idea of becoming there in terms of ethics and morality, and is the question of action not oriented towards more of reformist movement? It's more of a being reformer, where there's also always this binary between being a reformer and a philosopher, as in reformer is the one who's more action oriented. So I think a lot of philosophers that belong to Eastern thought, they've had this somehow we can see this commonality in them, the idea of reform in the society. So can you comment on these things that are sort of building in my mind?
No, I'll just be anecdotal. One of my senior colleagues, of course, I did not work with him, but when I came, he was already retired. Professor Subrata Mukherjee used to say, political theorist cannot be a Robin Hood. Political theorist can write, but he cannot say that, okay, Dhananjay has 50 rupees, Sanjeev has 10 rupees, we will take away 30 rupees and give it to him. So, and distribute it. So the Robin Hood thing, like I cannot tolerate somebody's richness, and I cannot live with somebody's poverty. Political theorist is beyond that. Now, a philosopher is also, of course, in a Skinnerian sense, the philosopher writes according to his times. So there is a very spatial context in it. But of course, the philosopher, whenever he is writing for a particular time, he or she is trying to give a particular solution, like Hannah Arendt's human condition, whatever she was looking at a particular situation, or Hobbes's civil science. So, or why did Machiavelli wanted a half man and a half beast in the princess in the form of a half man and a half beast? They were all particular situations where, the larger context in which competition, the logic of competition that developed in the 13th and 14th century. Now, the reformer, in a way, can he be a philosopher? Can she be a philosopher? Of course, that's always been there. Philosophy has always impacted on reform. We know the philosophy of Voltaire and Rousseau heavily impacted on French Revolution. And also Gandhi. My friend Dhananjay is a very good scholar on Gandhi, so he will tell us better. whether to put Gandhi in the shelf of philosopher or a reformer. So obviously, that is why he was the exemplar of ethics, is what Akhil Bilgrami says. So it's difficult to get, Plato was not a reformer, but you can say Gandhi was a reformer plus a philosopher. But you can have only reformers like somebody like activists, like say Anna Hazare. So it depends whether you are an organic intellectual. That is what Gramsci describes as organic intellectual. I can be a more academic, bureaucratic kind of an intellectual sitting in my room and just keep on writing on, okay, Dalits suffer, minorities suffer. But somebody like E.P. Thompson, who wrote this, The Making of the English Working Class, he was actually growing up with the miseries of the black, dark satanic mills. And then he saw the artisans who were coming up with the consciousness, class consciousness. That's why he said that class consciousness does not develop in the satanic mills. It developed in the suburbs of Manchester or England among the blacksmiths, carpenters. So somebody who actually was living that experience. So it's very difficult to have organic intellectuals, you can say. And we all know the classic debate between Sundar Sarukaya and Gopal Guru. So that is the cracked mirror. Your question is like that debate on the cracked mirror.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ravneet, for your question. Now we have a last question from Jayanti ma'am. Jayanti ma'am, I'm unmuting you. You can have your question.
Yes, good evening, sir.
Yeah, hi.
Am I audible?
Good evening. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you for your informative lecture. And I have little, so related to the previous thinker who raised the question regarding the Bhagavad Gita and Kant. I just have a simple question that why do we do a comparative or why do we relate Bhagavad Gita when we talk about the Niskam Karma of Bhagavad Gita to Kant? I just don't understand why do we do that. And because there are many people in Indian philosophical traditions itself, they believe in the karma theory, but we don't relate the Gita's Niskam Karma or the duty to other systems. But there are fond of like in the modern research, if you find that in especially with the Indian ethics, and whenever we talk about Gita, about the Gita's Niskam Karma, we relate it to the Kant's concept of duty. Where you find there is no, in fact, there is no much resemblance or much similarities, except that Kant speaks about universal duty is something which is universal, and Gita is something universal. The Niskam Karma is something universal, and some level of rationality, both the philosophy they talks about. Like that is my understanding. That is one question I just would like you to reflect. The second question, which I a little doubt, you may agree with me, because if we see the Kant's a priori or the a posteriori idea or the reconciliation between the rationalism and empiricism, the stand taken by Kant is something which is a kind of liberal or something which can be both the things are necessary. But when we come to the ethics of Immanuel Kant, the groundwork of metaphysics of morals, when he speaks about the categorical imperative, so you find a rigid moral system he has developed. So what is your take of on in this area? I would like to just the perspective which you are taking, that why this is some kind of liberal attitude, that reconciliation of rationalism and empiricism, and can be a middle ground he must be looking for. And then here suddenly you find in the ethics, when he speaks about categorical imperative, he said that act in by manner, so you can be an example, and keeping the promises, the Kant's morals are very rigid. So how do you respond to this? Thank you, sir.
That's a very interesting questions, because Kant's categorical imperatives and the intentions, so where he differentiates. Now, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, there is not that kind of a difference doesn't emerge, because you are not supposed to decide, where the agency to decide what is a categorical imperative and what is your basic intention, that actually is left to the agency of the individual. So in that sense, I agree that Immanuel Kant, you're right that there is a kind of, you both are right, a priori and a posteriori knowledge. And also Kant trying to bring in this idea of categorical imperative, but linking it to your earlier question of whether we should compare it to Gita or not, we should, in a sense, at least for our epistemological emendation. There is no harm in comparing, but of course, whatever results we get, as I said, at least when I try to compare it, Gita, the agency to do is completely left in terms of your nishkama karma. That is your agency. You just go on doing what is duty. If you are asked to fight, you have to fight. You cannot decide whether you are fighting your own grandfather. So in that sense, because there is the Kala Chakra, the Kala has been decided and determined by the Almighty. So in that sense, the everyday intentions, like what I desire and what is the categorical imperative, that choice, the agency to determine the choice may not be existent in Bhagavad Gita, because then the whole idea of nishkama karma will be collapsed. That is one thing when you compare Kant. And why should we compare? Now, even if you look at K.C. Bhattacharya, the way in which Raghuram Raju's book, The Debates in Indian Philosophy, I think the first couple of chapters deals with this. There are three ways of receiving knowledge. One is where, you get into a kind of Maginterian problem where you say that there is a death of tradition or crisis of tradition, or you don't accept, like, I don't want to compare at all. So that is a Maginterian crisis of tradition. So there is another way you say that, okay, I don't want to go with my own classics. Kant is the world for me because he is new. That's also problematic. So I accept all the European knowledge as quote unquote scientific, as what the British colonialists fed upon us. That's also not acceptable. But the third one, which K.C. Bhattacharya actually proposes, is critical. That is what E.K. Ramanujan also tries to do. You accept your Bhagavad Gita and you also teach Kant and try to see whether they can go hand in hand. That is what K.C. Bhattacharya says, and that is what E.K. Ramanujan says, the Indian way of thinking. That is where we are different. For Immanuel Kant, Bhagavad Gita may be some Oriental text which has no value for him, but we have immense value of Bhagavad Gita, and also we will value Immanuel Kant because there is some metaphysical, some God has given him the gift of writing. He wrote very well. Only we, at least if you look at the Indian tradition, of course, as you said, there are other traditions also. Every canonical tradition has its own value. Like the New Testaments are very much crucial in, bringing us the values of liberty. Okay. Similarly, the idea of duty, as you said, which is enshrined in Bhagavad Gita, idea of duty is enshrined in the Quran in Surah Al-Imran. That is the Surah 3, chapter 3 of the Quran, when it says Islam is a deen. It's a way of life. It's part of our duty. It is not something which is just theological, but what you do right and wrong is part of your duty. That is what is called deen. Of course, if you look at Khuda ke liye, the word deen, maybe you can say it is misused by the Maulana who is using, jab deen ki raah mein chalte hai, to dimag nahi lagana chahiye. But that is not the idea of Quran. Surah Al-Imran is very, very clear when you, and that is where when you do cherry picking of any text, if I just pick up Surah Al-Imran, then I get confused. I have to link each and every text. If I link chapter 31, where Quran is called the book of wisdom, with Surah Al-Imran, where it calls Islam as a way of life, the deen is a way of life. दीन की राह नहीं होती, दीन ही एक राह होता है. This is where even the learned clerics are misguiding us. So that is where, you know, we need to understand that every religious text has something good, and whatever bad, that is hermeneutically imposed on us by somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we have reached to the end of the program, but before I close the program, I would like to invite Nidhi ma'am again to deliver a vote of thanks. Nidhi ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Zerusha. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Zerusha. So I, Nidhi, on behalf of Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College, would like to express my deep sense of gratitude to you, Professor Kumar, for sparing your time and delivering such an interactive session, sir. We hope to have a long association with you in the future as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Over to you, Dr. Zerusha.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for coming and, you know, making our day and our lectures and sessions interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So now participants and sir, you can